G'day, mate. 40 here. So I noticed that post-liberalism is big topic in the news among the most sophisticated circles. So why is everyone talking about post-liberalism right now? And number one, I think it's largely because the liberal system isn't working so well anymore. And number two is that liberalism is based on fictions, and people get tired of lies, even if they're noble lies. And so one perhaps noble lie is that we're primarily individuals. We're not primarily individuals, right? We're primarily embedded in families, communities, relationships, tribes, or religion. That's how we experience reality. Number two fiction about liberalism is that we can be driven by our reason. And reason is among the weakest things that drive us. Probably the strongest thing that drives us is our genetic imperatives, our early imprinting, our social setting, our family, our situational incentives, right? These things all drive us far more than the strategic, autonomous, buffered use of our reason. And then another fictional nature of liberalism is that we're born with inalienable rights. From whom? Who gives these rights? God? Then that requires a leap of faith, which is great, but it's a leap of faith. So this notion that we are primarily individuals who can just strategically, autonomously plot our way through life and be driven by reason is simply not real. And so liberalism can work. Just because something is fictional doesn't mean it can't work. So liberalism can work by pretending that its partial insights are complete. And liberalism can work if it's added on to all sorts of other things like nationalism and or religion. But we're not primarily individuals. We are embedded creatures, and everything inside of us, everything in our lives inevitably leaks out, right? We don't get to hide. We inherit language, we inherit status systems, we inherit trauma and religion and class and hero systems and sex differences, mating markets, power structures before we make a single choice, right? So liberalism assumes that we're all autonomous choosers, that we can design our institutions around that fiction, all right? And the fiction was useful. It helped reduce sectarian violence. After the disastrous 30-year war in Germany in the 17th century, our political structures tried to make more and more of the political neutral and place it in the hands of experts. So we had a weakening of traditional authority of the monarchy. We had an encouragement of pluralism. We decided that we can't decide as a society on any moral norms. We have to let people coordinate and just choose their own way through life. And there were some advantages, but our choices aren't so free, right? Our preferences are profoundly shaped by our genetics, our tribe, our family, our incentives. Our capacities are unequal. Different people have different gifts. Different communities have different gifts. Socially, rewards are unevenly distributed. Our identity is porous. We're constantly affected by what's going on around us. And liberalism treats all these things as background noise rather than first-order facts. And so when the fictions of liberalism hardened into dogma that you just have to accept, then that led to the revolt that we see now. So what comes after post-liberalism? This is Patrick Deneen, who's a professor at Notre Dame.
The first of these, of course, is the idea that borders everywhere are and should fall, that there should be no more arbitrary separations between nations and peoples. And this should, of course, occur both economically, but also in terms of migration, that justice and openness demanded kind of open border worldview. And that I would say that's one of the high watermarks of a liberal worldview, is the argument that all boundaries and borders are fundamentally arbitrary. And of course, then associated with that is of course, an area that you work in quite a bit, the theory that in the economic domain, there should be no or very few limitations on the free exercise of individual choice in the economic domain. So laissez-faire economics. This was not only to leave alone, to leave be, but also the idea that the public order should be largely neutral or disinterested in a way in the decisions that are made in the economic realm allow people to make their choices and allow the sort of wisdom of collective decision making to emerge through a marketplace. And that worldview, I think, is now in some disrepair. The third area I would say was the kind of 90s confident belief in an American-led liberal international world order, or the rules-based order as it's sometimes called. There's a kind of self-confidence that the liberal beliefs of the American order, two of which I've just mentioned, should become the universal, the globalized political set of commitments. And one figure, of course, we would associate that would be Francis Fukuyama, not only declaring an end of history, but as that cry was took up, the belief that America should, in a sense, be the vanguard of advancing the end of history where there are still outposts of resistance. And the fourth of these is, which I might still seem to be in certain respects operative, but I think is becoming stretched thin, is the kind of the legacy of the sexual revolution of the late 1960s through today. So the decline of...
So when you have trade between nations, it's not just win-win equally, all right? There is a change in relative levels of power after trade. And so too with sexual relations, right? Some people are advantaged and other people are made much more vulnerable. Obviously, women need to be much more selective about who they have sex with than men, because women can get pregnant. Women are more vulnerable to STDs, and they can also suffer much more reputational damage from being promiscuous. And so society has an interest in how you conduct your sex life. Society has an interest in encouraging a man to marry a woman and to settle down, be monogamous, and raise a family.
Sexual norms that restrained or restricted in various ways sexual activity, of course, backstopped by the technological revolution of the pill and abortion, and now IVF and all the various technologies. Now, of course, I think the sexual revolution is still quite predominant, or the effects of the sexual revolution are quite predominant. But some of its outer, let's just say, the ways in which it's pushed every limit, even to the point at which it was becoming sort of, you could say, politically incorrect or inadmissible to acknowledge or regard a fundamental biological difference between men and women. I think that has proven to be a kind of outer limit politically, at least for the moment, of the sexual revolution. We'll see if that remains the case. But that reflects back to the first of the...
So liberalism assumes that we are autonomous, that we can just freely, independently choose. And that blinds you to reality. Families form us, communities form us, churches and synagogues form us. Men and women respond differently to incentives. Culture forms us. Situation and changes in the economy form us. That changes in power and status systems shape our beliefs more than rationality and argument. So post-liberalism is, one, a reflection that the current liberal structure is not working so well for many people. Two, it's a recognition of the fictional nature of liberalism. And this reaction is strongest among men, because men are much more exposed to institutional hollowing out and to the HRification of society. So there are fewer and fewer places where men can just hang out solely with other men. It'd be a bad idea for you to be part of a men's only formal organization, right? You can get away with it, say, if you're an Orthodox Jew, some kind of trad religious character where there is separation of the sexes. But outside of that, it would be a big demerit against you, particularly if you move into more prestigious opportunities, to have ever been a part of say, male-only spaces or male-only organizations. So when schools, churches, unions, work becomes increasingly subject to civil rights litigation and legislation and intrusion and HRification, men feel increasingly intimidated against speaking out and acting along the lines of their normal rambunctious impulses. When men have fewer opportunities to bond with other men, they don't self-actualize, right? They drift, they polarize, they seek hierarchy elsewhere. And liberalism assumes that men will simply choose better Well, many people can't because they're just simply not aware of choices, or they don't have the internal strength to make the right choices. So men in particular are told that they are sovereign, autonomous individuals, but they live in systems that shape the outcomes ruthlessly, and frequently they find themselves failing, and men are much less likely than women to share their feelings, to be open about their frustrations, and so often such men will go online looking for gurus.
Here we go. Clip number 1.
Even if I did explain it to him.
So this is a second part episode from Decoding the Gurus on Stefan Molyneux.
He can't justify it himself. He just says it. So I guess when my son says the earth revolves around the sun, can I say under this understanding of truth that he is making a true statement, or is he not making a true statement? I'm trying to understand, because he doesn't have the correct process, because I failed at teaching him, right? Maybe I failed.
Let me ask you something. I mean, I understand this because I've already covered this when I said truth is attached to a proposition when it is proven. It doesn't have to be proven by every individual, right?
Right. Okay.
I mean, you and I didn't have to come up with all the words in this conversation. Let me ask you something, because I feel like we make no progress. You don't concede anything. We never get to any meeting of the minds. It feels to me you just keep moving the goalpost. Now you're talking about what? About a child. And it's like, well, we're not talking about children, right? Children are in a process of development. So let me ask you this. Why does this matter to you so much?
Okay. All right. So seems like this caller has tried to make a pretty simple point, which is, imagine a child. Imagine I tell the child that the earth goes around the sun. The child goes, oh, okay, Dad. So the earth goes around the sun, does it? And according to Molyneux, the kid has just said an untrue statement. But maybe not, because he's kind of changing his grounds, right? Because now he says, as soon as someone has verified this claim, then anyone can say it, and it becomes true, Chris. But this is quite different from what he was saying before, which is that if the person doesn't know, then they're not speaking the truth, right?
Well, I think he's unwilling to address that contradiction, right? So instead, and he's tried various attempts.
So from our ruling elites over the last 50 years, we're increasingly told that diversity is a wonderful thing. And in practice, diversity means that we have less and less in common with each other. And that's supposed to be good, but that destroys social trust. It destroys social cohesion. And people feel this steady decline in the quality of life. You go to Europe, you go to Australia, and you notice that the average person seems to enjoy much higher quality of life than in America, because pretty much in every other developed nation, there's more social cohesion, more social trust, and more likelihood of some kind of shared hero system. In an increasingly diverse America, we have less social trust, less social cohesion, and we are less and less likely to share a moral way of understanding life.
Attempts to deflect from it. But then here, this is the beginning of a pivot, right? So he said, we're going round in circles. You don't concede anything. Like I'm delivering truth bomb after truth bomb, and you're stuck in the mud. You're throwing out, what's this about kids have come in, right? It doesn't clarify anything. So he says, why does this matter to you? That's his new thing, right?
So I grew up the son of a self-made man who had 2 PhDs, one of which was in rhetoric, and my father was quite adept with rhetoric. And I also remember when I was converting to Judaism, and this is on me, I sometimes put out this beaten dog vibe. So you see a dog that's been beaten, and it's just very skittish, very frightened, very jumpy. And that's often how I am. And other people pick up on it right away. And what is the impulse to do to someone like that? You want to just go, ah! You want to frighten them because they are essentially inviting you to bully them. And so I've gone through much of my life essentially inviting people to bully me, and I didn't like that. And Stefan Molyneux here is quite the bully because the caller is inviting him to bully him.
The flip of the gurus.
And this is the judo flip we're very familiar with from Dr. K, which is, hold on. Why does this matter to you? Why did you ask me this? Why do you seem so difficult? Explain yourself to me.
Yeah, we did hear this recently with Keith Raniere as well. So, let's see. Maybe we'll hear a little bit more echoes of Nixium here. So listen to this.
because how we think about truth affects how we believe and understand.
So why do I keep referring to hero system instead of moral system? I'm using the language of Ernest Becker from his great book, The Denial of Death. Mass secret police abducting people with no due process also reduces quality of life, social cohesion, and social trust. Well, you are referring to ICE agents going around American cities and abducting people who are in the country illegally. And so once there's been a determination that someone is not in the country legally, to me, that's due process. But I understand there are different perspectives on what constitutes due process. I am fine with people who are in the country illegally being expelled from this country. So to me, that improves the quality of life, that improves social cohesion, that improves social trust. But I understand different people have different hero systems. For other people, having a maximum number of people who are in the country illegally from all over the world, and there have been no vetting of these people, for some people that increases social cohesion, increases social trust, and improves the quality of life. I can't understand how that works. It's just a different way of experiencing life.
And navigate through life.
Why does this matter to you so much? This is very abstract. Why does this matter to you personally so much? Like, people can call me up, and I'm pretty good at just about every life situation. I've got 20 years experience doing public answers about. So everything else in your life is great.
And why are ICE officers masked? Because they get doxxed if they're not masked. And so with declining social trust and social cohesion and more viciousness between the various sides of the political spectrum, people have to take measures such as masking up, which further decreases social trust, further decreases social cohesion, and further decreases the quality of life. It's like when you have two nations that border each other, and the more steps that one nation takes to defend itself, the more threatened the other nation will feel, the more incentivized it will be to do things that will then make the first nation feel increasingly threatened.
Everything else in your life is going as beautiful.
So everything seems to go in either an upward spiral or a downward spiral. So right now, the United States is in a downward spiral, has been so for many years, just decreasing quality of life, decreasing social trust, decreasing social cohesion. And the more steps that we seem to be taking to try to reverse this, maybe just the worse it's getting.
As it could be, except for this issue, because this is what you're bringing up. So that's my sort of question. Of all the things that we could talk about, why is this one so important to you, and why do you never agree?
And the chat says, is Luke actually going to seriously argue that ICE has only detained, abused, and deported illegal immigrants? He has reached Fox News boomer terminal stage. I don't think I ever said that. So please, Chris, name one institution that is perfect. Just name one institution that has only done the perfect, right, legal thing. So there will always be mistakes. I don't believe that the majority of people that ICE has detained are in the country legally. It seems like a very tiny number. It seems like something less than 1%. So if ICE is temporarily detaining fewer than 1% of people who are legally here and then releasing them, I don't see the problem in that. On the other hand, if 50% of the people they are detaining are in the country legally, that's a big problem. If 10% of the people ICE is detaining are in the country illegally, and let's say detaining for more than an hour or more than 4 hours, that's a big problem. So what are the percentages? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? Or is it less than 1%? I think people should only do things they are proud of if it's published on the front page of the New York Times. I think that's a pretty good guide to life. It is not the perfect guide to life. So sometimes if the New York Times accurately publishes what you're doing on its front page, it will have devastating consequences to you and to the people around you, even though you're doing the right and the legal thing. So there are exceptions, and reality is complicated.
I disagree with the
I don't think there is a paucity of reporting on bad things and mistakes that ICE is doing. So accurate criticism, and ICE is receiving a great deal of accurate criticism, should make ICE better. It makes America better to have accurate criticism of its institutions, including ICE, including the Trump administration, including Bobby Kennedy, including Pete Hegseth. Accurate criticism, accurate reporting makes everybody better.
Premise. I think it's a loaded question.
You disagree.
This isn't. And this
Okay,
isn't the one issue.
what have you conceded to me in this conversation?
And the chat says, look, they detain legal asylum seekers. Okay, I'm fine with that. They refuse to release them. I'm fine with that. I don't want any more asylum seekers in this country. And they subject them to inhumane conditions until they self-deport. So what is inhumane? These are people who chose to come here, and there was a risk in that, but they chose to take that risk because it was the better of their options. So I am fine with refusing any more asylum seekers. That's ethnic cleansing. Stop pretending this is about the law. So people who have no legal right to be here are being deported. So what? Why should I care? You should move to Israel. It's much more consistent with your self-identified ethnicity and your anti-Western values. So you admit it's not about the law. Well, it's partially about the law, and it's probably partially about other things. Nothing is ever pure. You want things to be 100% pure. So I would be fine with a complete end to immigration. I would be fine with a complete end to taking in refugees and asylum seekers, right? That's my immigration policy for America. Complete stop. I would prefer, say, we just allow in maybe the top 1,000 people a year, right? Those with the most to contribute to America, maybe allow in 1,000 a year. Other than that, I would like a complete end to immigration and asylum seekers. The asylum seekers here now have followed the law. They've been granted temporary protective status, and now the Trump administration is reversing that temporary protective status. I don't understand why the Biden administration grants protective status or the Obama administration grants temporary protective status. Now you believe that that should be eternal. Why should that temporary protective status be eternal? It's also perfectly legal for the Trump administration to end that temporary protective status and send them back. I think we would be better off with a complete end to immigration right now. Complete end to refugee intake. Can you just stop lying and engaging in takia? Whatever that means. Your concerns about immigrations aren't about the law. They are about race. But white nationalists refuse to accept you, so why don't you move to Israel, afraid they won't accept you? I have no concern or interest in whether or not white nationalists refuse to accept me. Anyone who openly identifies as a white nationalist in the United States of America in 2025 is, in all likelihood, some kind of basket case. I don't want any more immigrants. I don't want any more white immigrants. I don't want any more brown immigrants. I don't want any more yellow, red, pink, purple. I don't want any more immigrants to this country. I want a complete end to immigration to this country until we assimilate the immigrants we already have. Ask me in 10, 20, 30 years, and then maybe we should open up the borders. Division on how broad or how narrow one's moral circle should be seems to be ramping up. Yes, the more pressure people are under, the more tension people are under, the lower the quality of life, the less they feel connected to others, the more they are going to draw boundaries and draw their moral concern circles narrower and narrower.
That based on how you describe truth, it needs to be proven.
No,
you don't
not
have a
based
method.
on how I describe truth. That's not a concession. It's something we have to agree on.
But we
don't make it
disagree.
subjective to me. What have you? Because listen, if you and I have talked for like 40 minutes or whatever, and
Sure.
we haven't agreed.
And the chat says, white nationalists control the federal government. Fascinating. Immigrants from Latin America assimilate a lot better than you do. Okay, two dubious assertions. So assimilation is a myth. People will tend to perpetuate their ancestors' way of life. Whether these are people from Sweden or from Haiti, from West Africa, East Asia, South Asia, Latin America, wherever you go, people tend to live out patterns of life fairly similar to their ancestors. People only assimilate in the most superficial of ways, such as in dress, in language, some customs. But life patterns will most likely more resemble one's ancestors than one's new fellow American citizens.
On anything, Why on earth would I want to continue the conversation? What have you agreed with me on? What have you accepted that I have put forward?
I accept that you have a different definition of truth, and I understand it, but it's not.
No.
So why do I give everyone a wrench? Anyone who contributes, I just give them a wrench, and that way they can't be censored by other people who don't like what they have to say. If someone says something that I find thoughtful, I give them a wrench. And when you have a wrench, your comments can't be deleted by other people in the chat. We have to do something about the flood of immigrants from Australia. They're undermining our greatest industries. Stephen Miller is making the US look more like Belarus or the occupied West Bank. It's not the America I know. So if you didn't pay any attention to politics, how exactly would America in December 2025 be any different from America in December 2023 or December 2029? For the normal person, their life is not affected hardly at all by whoever is the president of the United States, right? For a regular person, whether it's Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, George W. Bush, right? The quality of their life was not changed. So I've never been to the West Bank, but the notion that the United States looks more and more like Belarus and the occupied West Bank strikes me as a highly dubious assertion that is only possible to make such a dubious assertion if one is not interested in truth.
Oh, that's just accepting that's just accepting we don't agree. What have you accepted that I have put forward? I put forward a large number of arguments and observations and so on. Well, hang on. What have you accepted?
This feels very sneaky and manipulative on a lot of fronts. So the first of the clear cult-ish dynamics.
One hilarious thing about Stefan Molyneux is that he builds his online community, the largest philosophical community in the world. John Mearsheimer made my point about individualism more pithily than I could. So this is in his 2018 book, The Great Delusion, Liberal Dreams and International Realities. It says, my view is we are profoundly social beings from the start to the finish of our lives, and that individualism is of secondary importance. Liberalism downplays the social nature of human beings to the point of almost ignoring it, instead treats people largely as atomistic actors. Political liberalism is an ideology that is individualistic at its core and assigns great importance to the concept of inalienable rights, another fiction. Now, useful fiction. I'm glad to live in a liberal society. There are many advantages to a liberal society, such as having rights. This concern for rights is the basis of liberalism's universalism, that everyone on the planet has the same inherent set of rights. And it is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful fiction. And this is what motivates liberal states to pursue ambitious foreign policies. Now, that is a disaster, right? When you take your fictions too far, you get a disaster. So the public and scholarly discourse about liberalism since World War II has placed enormous emphasis on what are called human rights. Human rights, Samuel Moyne says, have come to define the most elevated aspirations of both social movements and political entities. They evoke hope and provoke action. They're also fictional, and pursuing them through the use of military force frequently leads to disaster. Right? We don't live our lives as lone wolves. We are born into families and groups and societies that shape us well before we can assert our own individualism. We develop strong attachments to families, to groups, to communities. We are willing to make great sacrifices for members of our own tribe, our own family. We are tribal to our core. Right? The best way for a vulnerable person to survive is to be embedded in a community, a tribe, a society, an extended family, and to cooperate with fellow members of your community. That's a far more effective way to live, right? Group strategy outcompetes individual strategy almost every time. Despite its elevated ranking in the liberal hero system, reason is about the least important of the ways that we determine our preferences, right? It's less important than socialization. It's less important than our early imprinting. It's less important than the social and economic incentives that we face today, right? We all have long childhoods in which we are protected and nurtured by our family, extended family, and community, and exposed to intense socialization. We only start to think critically basically by our 20s, By the time that we can start to think critically, our preferences are pretty much innate because we've inherited them from our family and community, right? We have very limited choices in how we formulate our moral code, right? What we regard as right and wrong comes from the way we were socialized.
Says, I'm a very well-respected figure. I have 20 years of advising people, and people, recognize me as a very important figure. And yet we are disagreeing here. So, and he reframes at the start, initially saying, is everything else in your life going well? Is there no other issues? Is this maybe a...
And let's get back to the chat. Chris says, Normal thinks it's weird and scary when their son's classmate gets abducted while being dropped off at his middle school. That is weird, and that is scary. It's not absurd that people who aren't signed on with Donald Trump and his agenda are terrified of what this man might do. Right? Different people have different hero systems. Different people not just think about right and wrong differently, they experience life differently. So it's not weird that tens of millions of Americans feel great anxiety about a Trump presidency, because that is the normal, natural, and even healthy reaction for them, given the nature of their particular hero system and their experience of reality. Good news is that Trump was narrowly elected due to economic disruptions from COVID. Real Americans horrified by Trump and Stephen Miller, and Republicans will be decimated in the long run. So who are the real Americans? Those who hate Donald Trump. And $10 super chat from Ricardo. Thank you. Blessings. You can most likely stay. Thank you, Ricardo. Early imprinting sounds real, but it also tickles my pseudoscience spidey sense. So early imprinting simply means that we learn from the people who raised us and who loved us and who fed us, and that our relations with our mother, father, brother, sister, family members, extended family members, and the people who we spent the most time with growing up and who we had the most love for or hate for or most intense emotions around, that those people, again, have a profound effect on the way that we understand life.
Symptom, the fact that you refuse to agree, right?
So, for example, I was raised the son of a Seventh-day Adventist Christian evangelist, and in his sermons, he essentially elevated martyrdom, like Jesus dying on the cross. That was like the greatest, most transcendent thing anybody could do. So no matter how much I deny it and hide it and try to disguise it, I've got this huge martyr complex. It's like, just let me suffer for the sins of the world, right? There's something about that narrative that still moves me, even though I've converted to Orthodox Judaism. But I still have that Martin Luther Protestant narrative, like deeply embedded in my system from early imprinting, even though I rationally, cognitively, and behaviorally make very different choices. But I still cry over martyr stories.
That's what, if you're feeling resistance, doesn't this reflect some problem with you? And then the very obvious rhetorical technique of the end of, tell me what I'm right about. And not just like what I believe or what you've accepted, like say how I'm correct and you're wrong.
Right? Yeah, it's incredibly sneaky, because he sneaks in the premise there that this caller has to agree with him, has to concede things to him.
So what do I think of the state of the institutions in the United States? I don't think they are, on average, serving people as effectively as they did 50 years ago. I feel that for all their flaws, that they're still better than what I see in most other developed countries. So America has its problems and American institutions have their problems, but I'm not populist in the sense that I think our institutions are terrible, and I'm not elitist or statist in the sense that I think our institutions are great. I think our institutions are flawed. I don't want to destroy them. I would like to shift them back towards the political center. So currently, almost all our institutions are controlled by people left of center. And in large part, that's because there's more human capital there than on the right. For example, I don't hate teachers' unions. I think American public school education is about the best in the world. Other institutions, I'll just place in the middle, okay? I don't have a strong feeling with one way or the other.
he doesn't have to concede anything to the caller, and he hasn't. He just keeps repeating his position on this without actually responding.
Does the United States have a corruption problem since this new Trump administration? Yes, it does. This is the most openly corrupt president in more than 120 years. And my two primary fears for this Trump administration were, number one, lack of competence, and number two, corruption. So, yes, the Trump administration has a corruption problem.
To anything the caller is actually proposing to him pretty clearly, really. And flipping it around so it becomes, let's do some soul searching and figure out what's wrong with you and how you can do better to make me happy, to please me.
Yes, and
So for people like Luke Ford and Stefan Molyneux and other yackers online, we can't just repeat what our institutions say. We can't just repeat what the New York Times says because we're not adding any value. There'd be no reason to pay any attention to us. So we have these powerful incentives to traffic in conspiracy theories. Because if we simply repeat what the institutions say, what's the socially accepted elite thing to say, then there'd be no reason to do the show. So when you operate out where the buses don't run no more, it's very easy to fall into all sorts of ridiculous things.
every time they tries the answer, saying, well, I understand that you have presented. He's like, no.
Yep.
It's not enough, all right? You have to completely
Submit.
accept that he's right. Yeah, submit. So no, he doesn't even get to finish the sentence where he says, you think, right? Because that's implying that there's a subjective assessment, right?
So my greatest concern about America prior to this new Trump administration was lawlessness, including illegal immigration. So I see a dramatic reduction in illegal immigration, legal immigration under this Trump administration. I think he's just done an amazing job there. I think we're making progress deporting people in the country illegally. I would like to think that he's having some progress in bullying our institutions back towards the center. I think that the spiking murder rate and violent crime rate that jumped up during the Black Lives Matter era has started going down under this Trump administration. Every Republican politician of note is more in favor of tough sentences, lengthy sentences, and death penalties for people who commit murder and violent crime than every leading Democratic politician of which I'm aware. So I am strongly in favor of the most severe punishments, including capital punishment for people who commit violent crime and murder.
Other people could disagree, which he doesn't believe it's possible.
Yeah, and like a micro observation there, you notice the interrupting, like he can and does interrupt the caller.
Yes.
The caller cannot interrupt him. There's just there's something I've noticed there with these.
No, I don't think that my primary concern, I'm not sure if my primary concern about illegal immigration is legality. My primary concern is for what's best for the United States of America. And what's best for the United States of America isn't solely coterminous 100% with what is legal. There are other concerns. There are social cohesion. Different groups have different amounts of social capital. They bring different gifts and different detriments to the country. So I would like people who contribute far more to the tax base than they take out in social services. So to the extent that we take in immigrants, I only want those who will contribute far more to the tax base, who will be overwhelmingly law-abiding, and who take out very little in social services.
Characters, which is they're very good at controlling the conversation. And I noticed this too with, say, Eric Weinstein when he's having debates with people and stuff. They're not very good at a lot of things, but they're good at these sort of micro strategies in conversations.
Yeah, quite manipulative. And like here as well, we'll hear more of this, but there's the implication, maybe.
Question from the chat. Why do I think there is better and more human capital on the left as opposed to the right? I don't know. I don't know. I do notice that under Donald Trump, Republicans have gone lower IQ in their messaging. And Donald Trump won 2 out of 3 presidential elections by getting low propensity, low information, and I would presume low IQ voters to vote for him. So I look at Donald Trump with awe in his ability as the prawl whisperer. I look at him with awe for his ability to communicate things to people with a 90 IQ.
We need to end this conversation, but I'm not enjoying it. It's not going anywhere. Like, you never hear the caller or the, because of the power dynamics, they never say, well, this conversation is just boring me. Like, what are you actually saying here that's worthwhile? Why should I continue? Because obviously in that, the thing Molyneux would say, well, if you don't appreciate the kind of wisdom that I'm dropping.
So Michael Smerconish was on the right, and he's now moved to the center. And in 2010, he published a novel about talk radio called Talk Radio. And he made the point that talk radio works like top 40 music, that you have like 40 hits that you're just always programmed to say and to offer people, and that you only use callers as a stimulus for you to then play your hits. So just like on Top 40 Radio, they may use 5-8 seconds from a caller. Hey, this is Joe with a love song to Danielle. I will always be there for you. And then go straight into the song. And the most effective way of doing talk radio is to allow callers, relatively little space on your show. You simply use them as props.
Well, I know plenty of other people who we need to call, but he's implying, if you don't change your attitude sharpies, maybe we need to just stop interacting. Like, we're not going to get anywhere. So yeah. I mean, I'd consider that a blessing, but
yeah, I mean that's right. The person is making poor choices. Those poor choices started with listening to Molyneux in the first place, and
so the chat wants to talk about white nationalism, and guess what? People are motivated by all sorts of things that they can't say out loud, and so there are all sorts of civic nationalists who also have a racial component, my God, to their nationalism. They also may have a religious component. They may have an ideological component. They may have a particular ethnic component, right? Nationalism isn't just one thing. So someone may style themselves as an ethno-nationalist, but they may be considerably driven by commitments to religion, to ideology, to certain civic values. People are highly complicated. People are not just driven by one thing, be it race or profession or religion or ethnicity, right? What drives people is complex. And guess what? The things that people say about themselves, right, you don't have to take them at face value, including me, certainly including me.
Culminated with him making these calls. The other little observation too, Chris, is I don't think, like, these manipulative strategies are definitely in the repertoire of cult leaders, but you also see it in controlling manipulative people in all walks of life, right? It could be a boyfriend,
sure. Yeah.
Could be at work. So I think it's kind of useful to notice them when they're happening.
Yeah. And so he posed the challenge there, no, tell me what you...
I really, really hate all the people in my life who bullied me, right? I really, really hate people who abuse religious authority because it goes back to my childhood. But the painful part of all this is that I am a person who has encouraged that bullying, right? We all play a huge role in how other people relate to us. We don't determine, we don't control how other people relate to us, but we encourage bullying. We encourage manipulation. We encourage people to lie to us.
You agree. And let's hear what the caller comes up with.
I accept that we have no business believing something or calling something true if we haven't proved it through the robust, sorry to use that word, experimental methodology through, if we haven't empirically tested something, we should not attach the label of truth to things that involve matter and energy.
Okay. So.
And the chat says, yes, I've certainly learned not to take Luke at face value. But do you take anyone at face value? Why would you take anyone at face value? People are incredibly complex, and people face all sorts of incentives to not say the truth.
You accept that something is true when it is proven.
Not is true, it's recognized as true. So I don't accept is true, I say is recognized as true. That, for me, that's a very important distinction.
Okay, so is there anything that is true?
Is there anything that is true?
2 and 2 make 4. Is that true?
So there are all sorts of racial nationalists who've changed, right? They've learned that there are other more sophisticated, more useful, more accurate, more powerful ways to go through life. And then there are other people who are probably motivated by all sorts of racial or ethnic interests, but would never dare admit that to anyone. So people change when circumstances change. And inside of the biggest rebel, inside of the blogger who boasts about he operates out where the buses don't run no more, right? Inside of all of us is this huge yearning to be part of polite society, to be recognized by polite society, to be honored by polite society, right? No matter how big of a rebel you are, there's a huge part of you that yearns for the embrace of the tribe, because life works better, life is safer, life is more harmonious, life is more effective, and it's evolutionarily more adaptive to live in the middle of the tribe, not to be operating out where the buses don't run no more. That is a really bad evolutionary strategy to pass on your genes. Look at me.
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course. Yes. No, of course. Yes, there are things that are true. Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
so there are some things that are true and other things that are recognized as true.
I would say if the Venn diagram is there are things that are true and a subset of those are recognized as true. So anything that is recognized as true must necessarily also be true, but some things are true and we can't publicly verify or recognize them as being as such.
So
Like
now
when you
so hang
describe
on.
that
And this is
yeah.
why it's so fucking circular.
So Stefan really doesn't like any of this, but to me, Chris, it seems pretty straightforward. Like there's probably some better theory of physics out there that, whatever, reconciles, I don't know, quantum mechanics and gravity, whatever. We don't know what it is. But it's
Geometric unity. We do know what it is.
yeah, we
Carry
do know
on.
what it is. Yeah, that's probably a bad example. It doesn't have to be something so fancy. But there's
So liberalism assumes the buff itself, that we're autonomous, strategic, that markets don't shape us, that technology is just a tool, that migration smooths out, everybody assimilates, right? Different groups have identical gifts, trade does only good things between nations. But reality is porous, right? Tech rewires us, markets reshape us, migration changes us, changes our communities, changes our nations. Trade changes us. Trade creates differences in the balance of power, creating all sorts of strategic threats. So when the Buffett theory runs into reality, things break. Right? Liberal economists treat free trade as just an obvious divine good. It's just all about prices and efficiency. People experience free trade as destruction of community, destruction of jobs, status collapse, identity loss. Right? The GDP might have risen, but lives frayed. So do we want to run our economy on the basis of certain abstract economic models that venerate free trade? Or do we want to run our society on the basis of what increases human dignity for most of our fellow citizens? Right? Liberalism says more and more choice creates more and more freedom. And as a result, we get more and more addiction, despair, fragmentation, destruction of social cohesion, social trust, lower quality of life, because all sorts of high choice environments become incredibly predatory. In a more traditional, rooted, tribal society, right, predators are much more afraid because they know that the tribe will kick their ass if it catches them. Right? Liberalism assumes that values are portable, assimilation just happens automatically. Not so much. So trads, people who understand the porous identity, want strong borders, they want industrial policy. Technocrats want speech control. They want algorithmic regulation. Trads want moral guardrails. Right? These aren't part of classic liberal categories, but these things arise because liberalism cannot manage the porous nature of reality. So post-liberalism doesn't mean a dictator, doesn't mean a war on freedom. Right? It means acknowledging the limits, the trade-offs, and the need to set boundaries. That for all the benefits of liberalism, there are certain amounts of liberalism that simply go too far, create too much destruction of the quality of life. So we are entering a post-liberal world. But it's here.
all kinds of things that are true, right? Like, did this animal is a descendant? Did it evolve from this other animal? We don't know, right? We don't have the fossil evidence, whatever. But there is clearly a truth out there. So that's all this guy is saying, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, he did a good job again of saying there are things that are true, and there's a subset of things that we've verified that are true. So to be verified as true, it has to be true, but that doesn't encompass everything that's true. And Molyneux's reaction is that fucking circular.
So my friend David is here, and he says, just arrived. Seems to me there are two major issues here. One, the unitary theory of the presidency, and two, the shift from globalism to regionalism. So I have a tangential thought on the first, and that is, it seems to be taken for granted in elite media discourse that the Federal Reserve should be independent, right? And that the EPA should be independent, and 100 other agencies should just be independent, meaning that these technocrats and bureaucrats should simply be able to do what they like without interference from the executive branch or the legislative branch or the judiciary. And I'm not so sure. Why is it automatically superior for the Federal Reserve to be independent as opposed to being accountable to the people through their elected president of the United States? I'm not saying that a less independent Fed is automatically the best way to go. I'm just saying I don't understand why it's so just obvious that we need more and more independence for central banks, that we need all sorts of bureaucratic agencies to be completely free from the influence of the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, right? Why is that just such a self-evident good thing? So I'm thinking about an op-ed I read a few months ago. An independent Fed is an unaccountable Fed. Independent bureaucratic agencies are not accountable. So one advantage to the unitary theory of the executive is that it brings these independent bureaucratic agencies under the people's control through the people's chosen representative. Now, I understand there are many arguments against the unitary theory, so I'm not one to argue for it or against it. I'll admit I do have a bias. I am in favor of bringing independent agencies under the control of the people, whether it's through the legislative branch or the executive branch. But I just don't get, why is it a horrible thing for an end of central banking independence, right? The Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they all just take it for granted it's the worst thing in the world to reduce central bank independence. Why? Right? An independent bureaucracy is an unaccountable bureaucracy. An independent Federal Reserve is an unaccountable Federal Reserve. Right? Why is it so important to simply allow bureaucrats to do what they want? Why is that just self-evidently the best, to have the Federal Reserve primarily an institution of globalism? So as the Federal Reserve has asserted more and more power in economic policy making, right? They're flooding the economy at times with money. They are ensuring credit lines that various European financial institutions have access to tens of billions of American dollars. Why is that in America's interest? I'm not saying it's automatically not in America's interest. I'm just questioning the assumptions of our elite media. Like, why is it necessarily the best of all possible worlds to have a Federal Reserve that is an institution of globalism? Right? Why should the Federal Reserve just get to make its own choices? So Trump's domestic agenda is built around critiquing the administrative state. And he's bullying many other institutions back towards the political center. So there are advantages to having bureaucrats and government agencies and Federal Reserves that are just insulated from the rough and tumble world of electoral politics, so they can just operate without distraction. They can uphold the highest standards, that we can remove more and more of the political into the hands of experts who will be just coolly, neutrally evaluating things. Right? I understand arguments for that, but many experts who proclaim neutrality and disinterested analysis are not so neutral and not so disinterested. I think overall our institutions did a great job during COVID. But I'll admit, the Republican Party and the Trump administration is a lot harsher on our institutions and their performance during COVID than I am.
Yeah. No, it isn't.
Yeah. So now let's see. Molyneux is going to explain how it's circular. Okay.
Oh God.
So now you're right back to, so I said, truth is when it's proven. And you say, no. And you accepted that. And now you say, well, no, but truth can also be unproven.
Well, for example, you stated earlier
Did you,
had an
hang on, did you
experience
say
of-
that?
Did I say that? No, that's not how I characterize it.
You said there's a Venn diagram
Yes.
and there are things that are true that have not been proven as true.
That we can, yes, that we, yes, sorry, yes, that we can't publicly verify. Yes.
Okay, so you've accepted nothing.
Well, I can prove that to you, actually.
No, you have accepted nothing, and you lied to me when you said that you had accepted that things are not true.
So I react really strongly to this kind of duplicitous bullying by Stefan Molyneux, because that's how I've experienced much of religious authority, both during my conversion to Orthodox Judaism, during my time in Seventh-day Adventism. And this isn't because there's something bad about Seventh-day Adventism. It's not because there's something bad about Orthodox Judaism. It is that I put out a vibe that I am a beaten dog and I'm easy to bully and manipulate. And so I've both made it easy to be bullied and manipulated, and I've intensely hated it. And I really hate what Stefan Molyneux is doing here, because it reminds me of so many clergy I have known. And I have this really intense reaction against this kind of lying and bullying.
True until they're proven. You said to me, hey, I accept that things are true.
No matter
if you keep talking when I'm making a point, we cannot have a conversation.
I am so sick of this, right? People who had more power than me just interrupting me, bullying me, lying to me. Right? This is part of the reason people voted for Donald Trump.
Conversation. This is what I'm saying. So you are emotionally compelled by this and you don't even know why. Like, I told you why I fight you on this, because I come from this mystical bullshit culture from the 70s. So I've given to you my emotional investment in this topic. What is your emotional investment in this topic? Because you're very manipulative. You have an emotional investment in this topic.
And as for the broader topic of globalism versus regionalism, we'll simply have a rejiggering, just like with liberalism. America will have considerable components of liberalism going forward. It will have considerable components of authoritarianism, because there's no other way to operate a functioning democracy without having an authoritarian component. We will always have, I would assume, considerable powers of socialism. We'll have considerable power in capitalism. We'll have considerable powers of oligarchy. And so the ratio, the mix of these will go up and down. So the so-called post-liberal world means that we're moving into a society that's a little less liberal. It doesn't mean that we're ever going to eliminate liberalism.
You have an emotional investment in this topic. I just need to know what it is.
Oh, Chris, at the beginning, you called it projection. And just perfect examples here. When Molyneux accuses this guy of being manipulative, it's just interesting, isn't it? How they always project what it is they're doing on the person. I guess the other things that he's doing there is he's really, like, he wants to get away from this topic, because I think Stefan knows that he's
And that's the thing I've noticed about a lot of people in power. A lot of my teachers, a lot of clergy I've known, right? You call them out for being wrong, for lying, for manipulating, and they won't admit it. You call someone out and they admit it. It's so rare. It's such a beautiful moment. We have to treasure those moments.
Caught in a web up. He's fucked up, right? So he needs to ship this quick smart to a discussion about what's wrong with this person. Why are you so fucked up? How can I,
What's wrong with you, right? You catch someone out lying, manipulating, deceiving, and then they want to switch the topic to what's wrong with you.
Play the guru and, fix your psychological problems. And it's just very interesting that, these sort of little threats and accusations that he just throws in there. Oh, you lied to me. You've accepted nothing.
Oh, yeah. Very strong direct accusations.
My father would have this rhetorical strategy where he'd say things like, oh, that's fine, but it's papist. And growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist, in that milieu, being papist, being Roman Catholic was like the worst thing in the world. Right? I heard 20, 50 times more negative things about Roman Catholics growing up than any anti-Jewish commentary.
Right. And you also heard there, Matt, that he kind of...
I was talking to this woman, a Jewish professor of the New Testament, right? Amy Jill Levine, I think she wrote books on She's published books on the New Testament from a Jewish perspective. And she talked about, I think she's at Vanderbilt University, and when they'd get a Seventh-day Adventist applying for the Vanderbilt University graduate religion program, someone would have to sit them down and let them know that the typical Catholic baiting, Catholic hatred that's so endemic in Seventh-day Adventism, that's not going to fly in the rarefied worlds of the Vanderbilt religion department.
Lays on that, as I said earlier, like he's revealed some things. He's been honest and direct. Like he's told them his investment and about his childhood, and you're being manipulative. You're lying.
Yeah.
You're not revealing what. Like, why don't we actually talk about what's important instead of this bullshit about truth, which I've already solved and you refuse to accept?
Actually, this is a well-known trick, isn't it? If you want to get somebody to open up to you, divulge stuff to you, then it's a standard trick, isn't it? You could make up something if you like, but definitely make out that you're opening up.
So First Things is a dominantly Christian traditional publication, and there's a thoughtful essay here, Nick Fuentes and Richard Hanania's Paganism. And it notes that the popularity of Nick Fuentes is a fulfillment of Ross Douthat's ominous prophecy that the post-Christian right will rise to replace the Christian right. So Nick proclaims Christ. He proclaims his Catholicism. He proclaims his Christianity, but you don't have to take people at their word, right? You don't have to accept the labels that people put on themselves, right? He wears this identity as a skin suit, but he is an avatar of the pagan right? He owes much more to Nietzsche than to Jesus, right? He admires Stalin and Hitler, various totalitarians, right? And Richard Hanania is always critiquing Nick Fuentes, but Hanania is similar in his essentially post-Christian or pre-Christian pagan vision of the world. They both regard caring for weak people, the outcasts, and the inconvenient as not something that we should concern ourselves with, right? They are repulsed by such people, right? So Richard Hanania believes the greatest good often requires human sacrifice, from babies with Down syndrome to babies born without some of their brains, or old people, right? And he essentially has this pagan frame that we don't need people who are stupid and weak. And Fuentes has the same perspective, right? He hates low IQ anti-Semitism, not because he has anything against anti-Semitism, but just because it makes him look bad that his followers are such morons. So he regularly accepts their super chat money and then abuses them, right? And he says there's no point having a book club because most of you are too dumb to understand the books. Well, Nick Fuentes is popular because he puts out a message that can be understood by someone with a 95 IQ. And Fuentes proclaims how Christian he is, how superior he is to godless pagans, but his attitude towards political power is very pagan, right? He wants a restoration of the Roman Empire. He valorizes Hitler and Stalin. Right? He pays lip service to the Christian sexual ethic, but he loves to hold forth on all sorts of 4chan rape cartoons, and imagine himself raping this woman or that man, often children, right? He longs for that high status male figure in the old pagan empire where he could just penetrate any orifice he wants. Ali Alexander credibly accused Nick Fuentes of predatory homosexual acts, and Fuentes rushed to kind of downplay them. Richard Hanania, another big apologist for sexual paganism, wants to loosen the boundaries of what constitutes a criminal act. And Fuentes claims to be the popular voice of the working class, but he's got a cold, elite, pagan perspective. It's not particularly Christian. So from Louise Perry, we get this image of Christianity as a clearing in a dark forest. Right? The forest is paganism, and it's kept at bay through the generations by the practice of Christianity. But when the labor of maintaining that clearing, that patch of tamed garden is abandoned, then the darkness takes over.
To them, and that puts the burden on them to reciprocate. So Molyneux is very straightforward.
Yeah.
In that maneuver.
Now, So the other thing is, and I did notice this when re-listening to it, that Molyneux dropped the like, what have you agreed? Because he mistook that the guy was endorsing his perspective, and then when he catches on that it's not a submission to his point of view, he gets angry, right? And he needs to get back to the psychologizing of things. So that was something, because he temporarily became mollified, if you like that,
Yes.
like, oh, okay, so let's carry on then, and ask some questions. But here he realizes you're still harboring a different opinion to me. You can't be doing that. I thought we agreed that I was right. And of course the you're interrupting me, double standard, right?
Yeah. Okay, so he's got a resistant person on his hands.
He does, and he's asked them, let's talk about the real issues. So let's see. And remember how this started out. Oh, very happy. I'm sorry if I, maybe I didn't express myself clearly.
So thinking socially is just so much more effective than thinking on your own. So even when I'm on my own, I'm thinking socially, because I'm thinking about, oh, how would this person react? Right? How would this community react? How would this come across? But talking about my ideas out loud and then getting pushback from the chat just makes everything much more clear.
There.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm not getting through, and I'm sure that's on me. I'm sorry. I'm just getting a little annoying. Doesn't mean it's anything to do with you. Doesn't mean it's...
So this is a recent Stefan Molyneux clip, right? This isn't an old one. So is it Molyneux a has-been? What's the upside of spending time on him? What's his appeal today, his cult, his audience, his reach? No, but I'm triggered because Stefan Molyneux's duplicity and manipulation remind me of so many clergy and people in power and teachers that I've experienced. And so this guy just triggers me. That's why.
It's your fault. Okay.
That's not your fault, right? It's quite shifted. The tone has shifted quite a bit, and it's going to shift more. So let's do this.
Well, right now I feel a little sad. If we're going to talk emotions, I feel sad because I think you're accusing me of being bad, and I'm genuinely trying to understand, and I feel like you're mad at me. And I
am mad at you.
And so we're told by therapists and the elite that you can be buffered, right? Someone can put you down, but that doesn't have to affect your self-esteem. You can ask out 5 different women and they all turn you down, and you don't have to feel humiliated by that. But that's not how the world works, right? The world works is that I am profoundly affected by what's going on with you. All right, when I have a positive interaction, I then have more energy. When I have more energy, I contribute more, and I am more capable and competent. As I contribute more, as I'm more capable and competent, as I feel stronger, and pride feels great. And pride is a pretty damn accurate measuring of how other people value us. So when my pride goes up, when my competence increases, when I will likely have more successful interactions with other people, which will in turn promote more competence, more contributions, more excellence, more strength from me, and it's a positive cycle. On the other hand, if there's a comment in the chat that just cuts me to the quick, and you see me shrink and pull down, right, I will have less strength. I'll be able to contribute less. I'll be less competent. When life is tough, I retreat. I become much more solitary. When life is going good, I expand. I want more social life. I want to spend more time with people. I'm willing to share more of myself. I'll contribute more. And then when I do that and it's successful, I feel strength. So people like Steve Jobs and Napoleon Bonaparte and Donald Trump and Barack Obama, people who are successful build on successful interactions, so they're getting more and more energy as they go through all the interactions of their day. When you have failing interactions, right, you can't be buffered. It's a fiction, right? You fail in your interactions with your spouse, with your kid, with your neighbor, with your employer, with your co-workers. You will shrink. You'll get smaller and smaller. You'll have less energy. You'll be less effective. You'll have more self-doubt. You'll have more and more incentives to become solitary, which will make you less effective. You'll become more removed from reality, so you'll become more weird, and then other people will more and more pull away from you. So these things either build us up or bring us down.
When someone's mad at me,
It's not a feeling. I am mad at you because you keep moving your definitions and changing the goalposts, and it's frustrating and annoying. It's an important topic. And when I'm having frustrating interactions with someone, there's no point pretending to keep reasoning. So you can talk about your emotional investment in this or why it matters to you so much, or I've got other callers, because I'm not enjoying this. I love intellectual discussions, right?
It's right. After January 6th, I really did turn on Trump. I was appalled by January 6th. I'm still appalled by January 6th. I think January 6th was horrible. But I did get a new perspective, like many other people. Once Trump started getting prosecuted, when all those charges were brought against him in New York, I got my back up. And I thought, this is an abuse of the legal system. Trump's the victim. We need to rally around Donald Trump. Yeah, I did have that. And then a few months ago, I read an essay by Helen Andrews about the Cronulla riots. And she essentially says that a particular group of men, right, a particular group has to control its space, or other people will come in and eventually control the space. And so to control space, men have to be willing to stand up. And so I hate January 6th. I hate the illegality, the crime, the assaults on property, even worse, the assaults on people and police officers, all horrible. I hate to think that there was a deterrent delivered, that Trump supporters saw a system rigged against Trump in 2020, for which there was some basis. I do not believe that the election was rigged, but there were disproportionate donations given by people like Mark Zuckerberg to, say, inner city areas that would encourage people to turn out to vote who are overwhelmingly likely to vote against Donald Trump. I saw all the different changes made by the Democrats in 2020 to enable more and more of their voters to vote. And I saw a lot of self-destruction by Republicans. But I hate to think that January 6th had a deterrent effect by Trump supporters against a system they felt was rigged against them. And I am not arguing that their perception is 100% accurate, but might be 40% accurate. And so I don't like riots, and I don't like criminal behavior, and I hate any assault of police. But men have to control space. And deterrence has to be delivered, and I would much prefer everything be done legally and without any violence. Unfortunately, throughout 2020, after George Floyd's death, Antifa and Black Lives Matter just ran riot and seized control of the streets. And in a sense, January 6th was a spasm of trying to take back territory by Trump supporters in a country that they'd seen increasingly pulled from them. So still hate it, but I've come to see the deterrent effect of it. Strongly wish it never happened.
But I'm not enjoying this. I find this really annoying and frustrating. Now, I've got 40 plus years of having intellectual discussions. I love debating. And you can either accept my expertise or not. But
He may have a tiny, exaggerated sense of himself.
I'm telling you, you have an emotional intensity or reason for this topic.
So the notion that emotions are somehow inferior to reason is not true. And to attack people for being emotional, I don't like it. Right? I got into an argument with someone about AI, and I was really passionate, and I was told, simmer down, dude, stop being so emotional. I didn't appreciate that.
And I know that because I've been doing this shit for almost half a fucking century. I know this.
Okay, so once again, the playbook is you're disappointing me. You're being very resistant. I've got better things to be doing than to be talking.
Right. Countless teachers and clergy have spoken to me in very similar manners to that, and I really don't like it. I really have a strong reaction against this kind of bullying.
To you, it's accusing him of being emotional. It again, projection, because Stefan
sounds pretty emotional.
Yeah.
But didn't this strike you as exactly the same as why am I not enjoying the feeling I have?
So I grew up with a father with a PhD in rhetoric, and he was very good at issuing pointed rhetoric to which I would have an emotional reaction and then I'd be put down for that emotional reaction. I did not enjoy those interactions. And my father was a polemicist. He was really good at arguing. He was really good at provoking people. But guess what? When you hurt people, they find a way to hurt you back. Even if you only hurt them because you love Jesus, even if you only hurt them because you love truth, even if you only hurt them because you love the Lord, you love your church, you love your nation, you love your community because you're trying to expose wrongdoing. If you hurt people, they will always hurt you back. And my father would receive a great deal of hurt because of all the hurt and provocation that he dished out. I have received a great deal of hurt because of all the hurt and provocation that I've dished out, right? Like my father, I spent my life unnecessarily provoking people way too much. And finally, I had a therapist who pointed out to me, when you unnecessarily provoke people, Luke, you are hurting them. You're doing something that is unethical.
Having my body right now, Midwest, like,
Yeah.
I'm not finding this conversation enjoyable, and that's your fault, right? And and it can't be me, because I have 40 years of having conversations. Like, I'm a legend of having
Yeah.
conversations. So
And look,
if
you can either accept my expertise or not. Go get fucked up, basically, because that is it. It's my way.
Religion has declined in America and in the developed world because other institutions and other things have been meeting people's needs more effectively and efficiently than religion. Right? We're not becoming a post-Christian America solely because the non-Christians are just so terrible. Right? We are moving increasingly into a post-Christian America because of very real failures by Christians, in particular, failures by Protestant clergy who only berate men and very rarely hold women accountable. Protestant clergy in America are a bunch of spineless types, overwhelmingly. And because they've been afraid to tell basic truths, because Christianity hasn't met people's needs, we are entering a post-Christian world. That's why we have this great new book, Why Religion Went Obsolete, The Demise of Traditional Faith in America. When a service goes obsolete, it doesn't inherently mean it's bad or terrible. It just means that something else has superseded it and meets people's needs more effectively, right? The power of theology has collapsed because people stopped valuing theology. Christian churches diminished in numbers because Christian churches weren't meeting the needs of their congregants, right? It wasn't just that Christianity lost arguments to secularism. Right? Christianity increasingly accepted the buffered self held out by the Enlightenment liberal perspective on life. Churches quietly agreed that faith is just one hero system. It's just one value among many, all privately chosen, psychologically, therapeutic, politically non-binding. Right? There's no reason that it should resist any competing hero system. Right? Now people treat religion as cope, as an expression. It makes me nice. It supports my identity. So religions become customer service. When religion becomes customer service, it loses its power. Right? Orthodox Judaism is not customer service. Right? High intensity religions have maintained and grown. It's the mild, meek, gentle, polite religions that have diminished in influence.
Yellow highway, right? With these sorts of people.
yeah. So then he goes from that to this.
But then you're just telling me something that I know that's not. You're telling me something is not so that I absolutely know to be so, and that's fine. I mean, you can disagree with me all you want, but we have to have a.
And at the same time, there are things about paganism that have appeal, right? There's often an honesty in a pagan approach that you don't find in a religious approach. There's a recognition of reality in a pagan approach that you often don't get in a Christian or a Jewish or a Muslim approach, right? There's an honesty about hierarchy, recognition, honor, power, beauty, right? Christianity disciplined all these things, tried to redirect them. Liberalism denied them. Paganism names them. There's a great saying in the Talmud, the signature of God is truth, right? When pagans are telling more truth than Christian clergy or Jewish clergy, right, they are going to have an appeal.
Conversation about the underlying emotions, because we're not making, hang on, because we're not making any progress on the intellectual side. because everything keeps changing. And the reason that I'm saying that is I make a proposition, you change the topic. I make a proposition, you change the topic. I try and draw you back, you change the topic. Now we're talking about, well, a semi-robust explanation to a child. And it's like,
So there is a Christian conservative professor at one of the elite universities, Robert P. George, and he's just out with an op-ed in the Washington Post. There are valid debates among conservatives. This isn't one. Right? This is another reason why people hate these type of elites and these type of institutions, right? These attempts to just constantly narrow the window of what we can talk about is just another reason that men rebel and may very well seek out paganism, where perhaps there's a much more robust discussion available, right? People don't like being told what are and what are not valid debates.
yeah, but you haven't accepted or admitted anything. And then you say, no, I do accept that something is true only after it's proven. And then you say, oh, no, but there's a bunch of categories of things that are true that aren't proven. And that's just contradictory statements. And you don't even notice that they're contradictory statements,
No,
which means you're arguing emotionally and not from a place of reason.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, well, the manipulation, gaslighting continues.
Gaslighting, yeah. And the thing that's interesting here is I actually think this is perhaps an insight into Stefan's mind. That is his recollection, I think, of their exchange, where he's provided, just...
So why has Stefan had fairly large following? Because he meets people's needs, right? I find him lying and duplicitous, but in the universe of alternatives for people who are in great pain, he's meeting their needs. And so sometimes if you're socially maladapted, right, if people find your presence a downer, the only people who will tolerate you will be cults and grifters and people like Stefan Molyneux. And we are not wired to be alone. So if you can't attach normally to people, you'll have to attach to something, and you might end up attached to Stefan Molyneux.
Proposition after proposition, highlighting these, providing a very robust, intellectual framework. And this guy's just been throwing out nonsense that doesn't make sense, shifting goalposts, moving things, and getting emotional.
So another person who's become incredibly successful over the past few years is Mike Benz. So I did many shows with Mike Benz back in 2018 when he was Frame Game Radio. Now he's become the leading Republican voice about the disinformation industrial complex. And why is Mike Benz being so successful? Because he puts out a narrative, a story that's incredibly appealing. And it's a lot easier to construct an appealing story if you're not weighed down by the facts. And stories can have tremendous power even if they're not true. And so Mike Benz is in the porous end of the spectrum, right? He feels institutions not just acting upon the world, but penetrating our very souls, right? And Mike Benz distributes stories that match people's life experience, right? People feel surveilled, managed, nudged, curated by an elite who are hostile to them. So then Mike Benz provides maps of overlapping nonprofits, federal government agencies, spy agencies, social media platforms, and people feel surveilled, managed, nudged, curated, invaded by a hostile institutional power. And so people hear these Mike Benz narratives, and he translates their sensations into grand architecture, and his work hits so hard. Right? My body loves the feel of the Mike Benz narrative. It just seems so powerful. Now, my mind starts thinking, skeptical, that doesn't ring true, but my body just loves listening to Mike Benz because he's tied in to the needs of people who feel nudged, managed, invaded by a hostile elite. So this is Mike Benz. Why I think the seeds of the January 6th Fedsurrection plot were planted at this secret meeting in June 2020. What this means for the January 6th pipe bomber investigation. So Mike Benz's background is a corporate attorney. And as an attorney, his number one consideration is not truth, right? His number one consideration is his own interests and the interests of his client. And so he's just so good at what he does, at creating narratives that meet people's needs.
Coal purchased a total of 6 galvanized pipes of this size on June 1, June 8. Oh, fuck. June 1, June 8, and November 16.
Sorry. I got this wrong. Okay, keep going here.
Hold, please. I'm going to hit you guys with the music while I pull up some receipts for you.
Hey, no. Let me just fast forward.
This, so that it at least sweeps this up. Because there are many permutations of this that don't rely on this exact structure, but if you proceed accordingly, I think you'll get approximately there, and that's this. It gets back to their one chance for winning the election in 2020, which is what they call the Red Mirage Blue Shift event. Red Mirage Blue Shift. This is CNN, for example, September 1, 2020, month and a half before the Whitmer Fednapping hoax story, 2 months before the election, 4 months before January 6th. Deciphering the Red Mirage and Blue Shift, uncertainty surrounding the election results. This was what CISA and the censorship operation to censor the 2020 election was all about. It was to pre-censor anything that might question or, quote, delegitimize an upcoming miraculous come-from-behind victory the day after or in the days after, where it would be a red mirage. Trump would win on election night, but then it would shift blue and Biden would win. They knew that was Biden's only path to victory and that it would look fucked to all hell. So they had to pre-censor 5 months before that happened, starting in June 2020. Any criticism on social media. That's why you got banned for questioning mass mail-in ballots. Because high-ranking government officials at the fucking Department of Homeland Security teamed up with their outside blob mob, who are all career specialists in toppling governments, know that the crux of it is perceptions of.
So people who follow Mike Benz, enjoy Mike Benz, understand porous identity. They accept porous identity. They understand the danger of these institutions messing with our soul. Right? People experience the censorship story as something that rapes them, something that violates them. On the other hand, elites and elite journalists assume that the censorship industrial complex, the disinformation complex, is basically good. Flawed, but basically legitimate. Right? Our elite journalists assume that American institutions are flawed, but essentially legitimate. They see transparency issues, not existential issues. They see power imbalances. They don't see metaphysical overreach. So for them, Mike Benz is an outsider. He's building these stories that threaten to collapse the distinctions between coordination, coercion, and conspiracy. So they want to pass, they want to contextualize, they want to contain, and they want to demean and put him down. They want to expose him. So journalists feel like they are responsible to the facts, that they've internalized these important moral norms, and outside commentary coming from people like Mike Benz and bloggers and vloggers, it's unfiltered, it's undisciplined, it's uneducated, it's emotive, it's epistemically dangerous. So the press and the experts, they loathe the uncontrolled public. Right? They see themselves as disciplined, but the public is undisciplined. Right? They see themselves as buffered, but these poor people in the public, they're still bitter clingers to their guns and their religion. And so our elite journalists start with the buffered assumption that their professional disciplines, that their norms insulate them from distortion. But there are all sorts of things that they believe that are simply not true. For example, many bloggers were far more accurate about the devastating effect of hysterectomies and oophorectomies as compared to what medical associations and leading doctors were saying. So often you'll get raw truth from a blogger or a vlogger or a poster on social media that is far more accurate, far more in reality than what the experts are saying. And sometimes you won't. Right? Political belief systems aren't based primarily on principles. They are strategic. They are ways to form alliances. So liberals present themselves as following truth and transparency and norms of discourse. But all these things are really alliance-preserving tactics so that their tribe stays in power. So what Mike Benz does, he unsettles the mainstream media by calling attention to their alliance structures that they usually don't put in the foreground. So elite groups rationalize their coalitions as principled commitments. Mike Benz flips that frame and he calls them political and self-interested. So people inside these buffered institutions, they feel attacked. From the outside, just looks like Mike Benz is trying to map their power. So every coalition, every religion, every political party produces stories that serve their own interests, right? That's alliance theories. Mike Benz oversimplifies things in ways that suit his audiences. Legacy institutions oversimplify things in the other direction because they don't want to see themselves as political actors. They want to present themselves as neutral experts. So the mainstream media depends on the Buffett identity assumption that they operate with reasoned analysis, expertise, professional norms, procedural safeguards. So these things create this reliable boundary between the self and the world. And so people who rise to power in the mainstream media and in our elite institutions, they all share this assumption. Institutions are imperfect, but fundamentally legitimate. We just need to audit our systems and improve them. Threats come from breakdown or abuse, not from structure itself. Right? The self is stable, rational, not easily invaded. Information governance, censorship, this is just a technical challenge. It's not a metaphysical one. Right? The porous identity of Mike Benz means that you feel yourself permeated by all these larger forces.
Legitimacy. That's what tips judges, juries, Supreme Court decisions, riots or protests in the streets, resistance movements, so they had to pre-censor that. At the same time, they had to deal with the fact that in the event of a red Mirage blue shift, and a substantial portion of the country still thought Trump was a legitimate president, and Trump still had 100 fucking million Twitter followers and was on Twitter every day, they thought Trump would be a shadow president. That he would, foreign leaders would look at him as the real head of state and would seek diplomacy with him. And half the country would see him as the president and wouldn't obey federal orders. It could cause a constitutional crisis. So they didn't just have to beat Trump. They had to stop Trumpism after Trump, even if they won in the red Mirage blue shift.
So to an elite journalist, elite academic, right, Mike Benz's famous diagrams, they look conspiratorial. It's just a messy conflation of disparate groups. But to Mike Benz's audience, his diagrams are revelations. So there's a fundamental disconnect in how the self perceives its own safety, right? The Buffett self thinks, I am safe, my mind is intact, information environments can be adjusted, I am separate from them. The porous self thinks, my mind is being shaped and attacked by unseen actors, by devils. The outside world is flooding into me and abusing me. And Mike Benz speaks effectively to the Buffett identity.
And they needed to engage in color revolution preparations in case Trump won. And so one of the highest ranking military officials of the Obama administration, Rosa Brooks, author of How War Became Everything, how Everything Became War and the Military Became Everything, now Georgetown Law. She was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, counselor to Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. I read her book, chapter 1. She talks about her CI blue badge for this. Now, she headed up the Transition Integrity Project, which was, now actually, I should note, subscribers will be sick of me saying this probably, but if you're new here, welcome. I do these streams every week for subscribers. 3 ways to stop Trump before the 2020 election. This is who ran the Transition Integrity Project that I'm about to walk you through. 3 ways to get rid of Trump before 2020 by Rosa Brooks, extremely powerful military official for the Obama administration. She wrote this January 30th, 2017. Trump had only been in office for 10 days. He was inaugurated January 20th, 2017. She wrote in Foreign Policy, elite mainstream press, 3 ways to get rid of President Trump before the next election. That election cycle just concluded 10 days ago. Are we really stuck with this guy? But the magic in this article is not the 3 ways. It's what's below the fold. You go to archive.is, get around the paywall for a second. Rosa Brooks wrote, even though the article is called 3 ways to get rid of Trump before 2020, as a high-ranking military official. Actually, very deep down, she says, actually, there's a 4th way. I didn't want to put it in the title of the piece because it's kind of insurrectionary. The 4th possibility is one that until recently, I would have said was unthinkable in the United States of America, a military coup. So a high-ranking Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, a high-ranking Obama military official says actually there's 10 days into Trump's first term in office, less than 2 weeks in office. A high-ranking military official from the Obama administration says 3 ways to get rid of Trump before the next election. Impeach him, indict him, get him to step down, congressional, blah, blah, blah. But she writes, actually, there's a 4th way. I would have considered this before. We had to be kind of hush-hush about this. The 4th way is a military coup. We can military coup Trump out of office.
So Mike Benz speaks like an attorney. He's very effective, very, very convincing. If you're even somewhat open to his point of view, you start listening. It's like, oh yeah, all the dots start connecting. All right, and so that's a very different type of discourse from the academic, from someone like Patrick Deneen here, who speaks what comes after post-liberalism.
Those areas that I was mentioning, the idea of borderlessness or limitlessness. And I think in a way you could say the meeting point of those, where those two, or where that belief in borderlessness meets in a way in both, you could say in the outer domain or the political domain, economic domain, in the belief in borderlessness. And it meets in the kind of, like, could say, biological domain or the kind of internal, the corporeal domain, when we think of human sexuality. In all of these spheres, and these are just four that I can just rattle off the top of my head, I think we see the kind of, the limits of liberalism. The limits of its own logic have now led to a kind of rejection, a blowback that's often regarded or described as populist, but it may also be just simply where those beliefs in limitlessness touch reality and where reality touch the everyday lives of ordinary people. And so when I say that we are post-liberal, I think we could just talk about those four domains all day long and say that in whatever way, shape, or form, the sort of the world in which we are entering looks like, it's not going to be, or it's very unlikely to be, some form of the extreme versions of those four areas as it seemed to have been moving toward only several years ago.
So I want to try to make a distinction. Maybe it's a bit pedantic between, I guess, what I would call liberalism and maybe neoliberalism, and really sort of drawing the line right at the end of the Cold War, because I'm struck by the extent everything you're describing certainly characterized the post-Cold War era, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. It seems to me it didn't necessarily characterize, say, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Whether in the sort of global Cold War context, certainly in the cultural conflicts of the time and so forth. And
so we're always on a path. We're always in liminal space, right, between moving from one section of life to another, but we're also always on a path. And so the United States was only able to so quickly and effectively manufacture so many bombers and planes and weapons because it had a huge industrial base at the time. And so the industry that was making cars just shifted to making weapons. And we were able to make that transition fairly easily because we were on a manufacturing path. Now that we don't have that manufacturing base, it's a lot more difficult to make that change. And being on a liberal path, right, it sends you in a direction where transgender identity is perfectly compatible with the Declaration of Independence and pursuing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? If changing your sexual identity makes you happy, isn't that just part of the liberal perspective on life? So I think not so thoughtful conservatives say, oh, I like classical liberalism. I like liberalism up until the Cold War, but the liberalism that came after that, the redistributionist liberalism, that's the bad kind of liberalism. I don't find that terribly thoughtful. I love this critique here of Stefan Molyneux by Decoding the Gurus.
A sample, but it is representative of what his content's like. But here's the outro of it, just so you can hear.
Okay, listen, I know we got a bunch of people who want to talk. I'm really, really sorry. Now I have to go, but I actually do. So, but I will do a bonus show tomorrow. Just keep your X running, and I'll throw it up because I'd love to hear what people thought about the earlier discussion, which I found really, really interesting, and I would love to go longer now, but I can't because it's Halloween. So have yourselves a glorious, lovely evening. freedomain.com/donate. Everybody who donates today gets a bunch of free goodies. You don't have to necessarily know what they are, but it's offers to help you move, and I will show up in a thong.
Great.
And the thong won't even be where you think, and it might. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to gross myself out with that whole analogy. So thanks, everyone. And again, thanks, Kerry, for a great conversation and for great questions yesterday. Lots of love to everyone. We'll talk tomorrow. And don't forget, Sunday morning, 11 a.m., we've got our donor show, which you can get a hold of by subscribing at freedomain.com/donate. Love you guys so much. Thanks, Emil. Bye.
Yeah. Yep. He's kind of a creepy guy.
He's very creepy. He's just like naturally creepy, right? Even when he's
Yeah.
making jokes, which are, like
Yeah.
in another context, it could just be, he's making, an off-color joke about something and highlighting, that would be inappropriate. But with him, it comes across like sleazy.
Yeah. I'm
Character.
amazed. It's amazing that it works because,
I know.
like I get that he's got the gift of the gab and all of that, but does he have charisma, Chris? Would you call
I mean,
that
he
charisma?
clearly does for some people, but I find him repellent in his core essence. Like just the way that he's constantly manipulated, constantly undermining, constantly projecting, being hypocritical and everything. And even when he's being nice, there's like sinister undertones. So
Yeah.
I just under and overtones. The tones are just echoing around the corridor. And
Mm.
like the thing is, Matt, if you remember, just to give my overall thought on this, when we started, we played clips that were, I think from 10 or 15, 20 years ago, right? Stretching back to his early content. And you heard him being a horrific person. As I said, I interacted with a friend who got interested in his material because he was doing the kind of right-wing polemical stuff and listened to some of this kind of content years and years ago. And it was full of the same things. And here we are in 2025, and he's still doing the same things. And he's been through times when he's had, actual like physical locations with young, impressionable people living near him in like cult-like settings. He's been profiled in documentaries about online cults, and he's become a MAGA Republican. He's went on tours with Lauren Southern. He's done like a whole ton of things, and now he's in like a little, the little niches that exist. He's back on Twitter. Elon put him back on. He's able to carve out his niche online, and he's insidious.
So I agree with, I think, pretty much all of the Coding the Guru's criticisms, but Stefan Molyneux is a human being who does funny things, who has said insightful things, who's offered useful commentary. All right, people are a mixed bag.
Yes, like I find him as repellent as I do Scott Adams and the worst figures that we've covered. He might not have the most reach, but I think he does a lot of damage to people that fall into his web.
Yeah. He just seems like a pretty terrible person. And I think we kind of deliberately didn't focus too much on all of the big ticket things that just makes him a terrible person, like his, being basically a racist, pushing the white genocide conspiracies and stuff, supporting eugenics type policies. And I mean, we have covered his misogyny stuff. It comes through entirely, but it's really quite intense, and it is every part of his philosophy. It's just imbued into it. I shouldn't call it philosophy because it's not. It's a weird culty system. And speaking of the cult dynamics, like as you said, he's found this little niche for himself. He's got these various paywalls. He's been kicked off and banned from pretty much every payment providing type platform, but he's still there on locals and on his own domain, whatever it's called,
Free domain.
And he's coined for those terms like defooing, departing from family of origin, encouraging people to sever their ties with their families if they don't meet his very specific moral and philosophical standards. And like it's good that he's been sort of pushed into this tiny little bubble. It's good for the rest of us. It's good for society. But the flip side to that too is once you get past his teasers, if you find his teaser like free material interesting, whatever, and you cross that threshold, then you're in a very high intensity thing where you'll be calling up. He knows you. You're having repeat conversations.
Yeah.
Apparently, we had this allusion to it, but he seems to have created these and the thought is horrifying. Stefan Molyneux AIs
Yeah.
that have been trained on all of his content and are kind of there with you all the time to answer all of your life questions.
Good God. Though it does
good
sound
God.
like he doesn't trust them to be as manipulative as him. Like, but the guy was like, I'll, why don't I play the transcript to the Steph AI bot? He's like,
Let's see what it
wow,
says.
that's a cop out. Yeah.
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 So what can you say about this person? Like, it has given us, like, I think, better insights into the interpersonal nature of how cult leaders operate, right? We saw it with Raniere. We saw it with who was the other cult person we covered?
Reverend Moon.
Yeah. And I think you're getting a feeling for how they operate, like one-on-one. Like they're like all of those toxic behaviors that you might see in your everyday life. You might see it in your workplace, like, to varying degrees, but you see them here at full intensity. The gaslighting, the passive aggression, the manipulation, all of those little tricks, those little judo flips and stuff to sort of turn the spotlight back on you and put you on the back foot, where the intention is always for you to essentially submit to them and accept everything that they're telling you. So I think it's helpful for people to hear these techniques because, hopefully you'll never run into a real life cult character like this. But, people do run into like watered down versions of this in all kinds of contexts. And I think it's just good to be able to spot the red flags.
Yeah, and I also think it's worth noting that some of the more kind of unpleasant aspects, like the direct challenging, the accusations, the calls for submission, they're usually wrapped within softer stuff, which is expressing caring, expressing, I'm a deep philosophical, I love having conversations, I like to be challenged, right? And you've heard how much Stefan enjoys being challenged, but you also heard how many times that he explicitly stated that's what he's about, right? Like he loves having challenging discourse about philosophical topics. Does he? Does he?
Everything he says is a lie. Everything he says is untrue. It's the opposite. It's more than untrue. It's the opposite of the truth. But no, it's true. Like everything is wrapped in a sugary little coating. And what they are good at, this was true of Raniere as well, which is like listening and being quiet, like they let the person talk, right? And they definitely, like, they give the people the feeling of being seen, I guess, like really pay attention to. And as long as you do what you're told, there is a lot of sugar there.
It's the same appeal with chiropractors and acupuncturists and alternative medicine. They give you lots of individualized attention as opposed to a normal doctor.
In terms of that deep connection that they're forging with you. And I kind of am getting some insight into why it works.
Well, I also noticed, like, I swear to God, this is a warning sign. When people are willing to take such long, pregnant pauses when responding to people, like, the only people I've seen do that are guru types or a couple of academics, right? But it's not actually that common, and it's unusual, right? Because they're like pausing for effect for their words to hit, and it's also like a power dynamic where you're able to just like, you know, stop in silence until someone responds or give like a long dramatic pause. And I think that's an interesting thing that we've heard that in the Keith Raniere stuff and the Stefan stuff. And I suspect we'll hear it more.
Oh, that long pregnant pause, you hear it amongst most of our gurus. Like Eric Weinstein absolutely does it.
Yes, exactly. I know. So, but not normal people, man. Not normal people.
No.
They don't.
So in a successful conversation, the gap between one speaker and the next speaker is about 0.1 of a second. Conversations where the gap is 0.5, or God forbid, longer, there's something really messed up in that relationship. That's a relationship that's on the rocks, right? All the difference in the world between that 0.1 and 0.5 of a second in wait time between response. So Mike Benz speaks directly to people who sense that they're being penetrated and permeated and abused and raped by demons and outside forces, right? And so Mike Benz looks at censorship not as a governance issue to be reformed, it's an existential soul threat to be survived.
So this person who openly wrote in mainstream press that we should consider a military coup, a coup to depose the democratically elected president just 10 days into his presidency, she would go on to spearhead one of
So there's a certain emotional tone on the right, right? This is the tone of right-wing talk radio. Urgent, maximalist, totalizing. The elites are trying to screw you. I'm fighting for you, right? So Mike Benz doesn't discuss discrete problems, right? He outlines systems that seep into everything. So this is the folk sociology of knowledge, right? Mike Benz represents the outsider who just feels the effects of power and then develops stories and explanations and narratives that contextualize elites and expose incentives and dismiss institutional boundaries. And his audience shares this boundary. They all feel this identity. They all feel acted upon, ravaged, rampage, raped by these large, opaque structures that they can't name. And Mike Benz provides a service. He names the structures. He gives them a villain, explains how they have agency, and they have a map, and he makes their experience of life understandable, right? So Mike Benz's audience doesn't require him to be factual, to be procedurally perfect. They just need him to make sense of a world that feels intrusive.
the craziest scandals in American history that I think probably only me and at this point, like my subscribers have really gotten drilled into their head. Now, the Transition Integrity Project was said to be a war game exercise over several days in June 2020. Remember that because Cole bought these pipe bomb parts over 2 phases.
So Mike Benz is often covered by the mainstream media, and they almost always misread him, right? They critique him for being a poor liberal, for claiming total coordinated control, for spinning these grand conspiracies. But what Mike Benz is describing is the world as experienced by tens of millions of Americans as a permeable system. So Mike Benz is not just on the porous side, he's on the maximal porous side. Right? He's not sloppy, he's not crazy, he is systematic. He has specific gifts in translating complex institutional interlocks into a story that matches the porous lived experience of tens of millions of Americans who tend to vote Republican. So the elite media hears paranoia. Mike Benz's audience hears validation. Finally, someone is naming what I feel, what I experience.
June 1, June 8, so early June 2020, exactly when the Transition Integrity Project held their war games. I believe it was June 5th and 6th or something. And then again in November 2020. Now, before I read you this document, I want you to understand that the highest levels of American political
Now, I come from the land down under. I come from the land of wonder. And before the white man arrived in Australia, it was dominated by Aborigines who had a porous identity. There wasn't much of a boundary between the self and the land, the self and ancestors, self and spirit forces, and social obligations, right? The land spoke, the dead were present, dreams carried knowledge, right? The country was not a backdrop, it was a living relation. Identity wasn't buffered into some interior psychological space. The person was porous to kin, to story, to place, to rituals, to storms and lightning and rain, right? It was a metaphysics that assumed interpenetration rather than insulation between the self and the wider world. So Aboriginal systems and Aboriginal politics and Aboriginal law was not focused around the individual's inalienable rights, right? Autonomy was not the central ideal of Aboriginal life, right? Obligation flowed through kinship lines, through totems, through ancestors. Person wasn't sealed off. People were a node in a network, right? Harm or magic done to one person then reverberated through others. Knowledge was relational and restricted. You didn't own it as a private good.
Power did this war game run by Rosa Brooks, the Pentagon senior official who openly called for organizing a military coup. Who was a part of this that I'm about to read you? Michael Steele, the former head of the RNC, the former head of the Republican Party. John Podesta.
There are times in my life where this level of intensity and maximalism probably appealed to me. Right? It's off-putting to me now, but I recognize that it meets the needs of tens of millions of people. Now, we're moving into an increasingly post-liberal world because liberalism can't heal itself. Ross Douthat makes this point in the New York Times, right? Economic growth is not going to solve our problems. right? This liberal model of free trade and exchange, and it just helps everyone, is not how the world works. Right? When you have trade between nations, you have a change in the balance of power between nations, which has security implications. Right? So you can't just say, hey, let's buy as much oil and gas from Russia. Let's open up our economy as much as possible to China. Let's relocate our industrial base to China. Right? Let's just allow our AI companies and our tech companies to send the most advanced computer chips and technology to anyone. Right? In a liberal free trade perspective, you'd be A-okay with all of that. Economic growth doesn't cure dislocation and the costs of liberal individualism. Right? There are more important things than economic growth, and that is the dignity of your fellow citizen. Right? There's no liberal answer to the dominant problems of today of increasing atomization, dislocation, decreasing social trust, decreasing social cohesion, and decreasing quality of life. So our liberal elites are dodging rather than facing the trade-offs that come with liberalism. Right? You can add liberalism, you can add a democracy, but something else is lost. And you can add hierarchy and the populist appeal of a united nation, and things are lost with that as well. Everything comes with trade-offs.
The reason I guess that matters, first of all, is I think a lot of people would say, well, weren't the Americans of the mid-20th century sort of fundamentally liberals in the small L sense? But also because it goes to the question of, to what extent is that still a viable model, right? Because if you're saying kind of, well, everything we would call liberalism, we are moving beyond, then we're really in kind of terra incognita. If we're saying, well, we really went too far in the 90s, it feels like there's something much more tangible to start.
So people like Mike Benz and G.D. Vance, Stefan Molyneux, are often called opportunists. But evolution rewards opportunism, right? If you are sensitive to changing incentives and you're willing to exploit opportunities, right, you're going to be more likely to pass down your genes, right? You find new niches, you recognize collapsing institutions, you see weak enforcement, you see transitional periods, right? Settlers, traders, inventors, climbers, strategists, right? They do well when they recognize that the world is changing. So in stable, high-trust societies, long-term cooperation beats short-term opportunism. We feel like in America, our trust with our fellow citizen is steadily decreasing, so that increasingly incentives short-term moves, right? In volatile, zero-sum environments, opportunism will get more reward than loyalty. So modernity mixes both, which is why people feel so morally confused. So opportunism is a strategy more than a trait. It's adaptive when uncertainty is high and enforcement is weak. It is punished when stability is high and reputation systems are strong.
From or build from anyway, if we reach back to it. So how do you think about how you would characterize that prior era and how it fits into the broader analysis?
Yeah. So there's the question of contingency, or you're raising the questions of contingency versus a kind of inevitability, to put them on sort of extreme poles. And I tend to be a bit more in the inevitabilist camp, although I'm a soft inevitabilist, if you will. In other words, I think that there was a strong tendency within the liberal ethos that moved, you could say, when occasion arised, that in a liberal order, various agents, you could say, the sort of the leaders within a liberal order, whenever there was a confrontation with any kind of a limitation on individual freedom, the strong tendency over time was to seek to tear down or to eliminate that obstacle, and to redefine any obstacle.
So someone who's not liberal and they see a gate, they ask themselves, maybe there's a purpose for that gate before they tear it down.
Egalitarianism. Nobody ever said in America, we're fighting this revolution because of fraternity and equality. It was give me liberty, 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 or give me death. Or it was the Bill of Rights later. It was the idea you want to be left alone and do your thing and have property to pass on to your kids and freedom of speech and worship. So that there is no Bill of Rights in these constitutions like ours. So misinformation and disinformation is not a left-wing tactic over there. It's the government. Because their interest is not in
He's talking about Europe.
What a person should say, has a right to say things. It is in the right of everybody to be made equal. And when you speak, that is an enemy of equality, because people are born not equal. And to make them equal, as Europe does, not like China or Russia did, but more mildly, socialism, not communism, you've got to force people to shut up, because it's not the natural condition of people to work hard and turn the fruits of their labor over to their neighbor. So these companies, then when they go over there, they censor them, they fine them, and that's how Trump won them over. He's called in Mark Zuckerberg, and he called in all of those people from Google and Amazon, all of them. And he said, you know what? You hate me and I don't like you. But these Europeans are going to censor you. And I want you on our side. And I won't regulate you. I won't bring you in a room like Joe Biden did, according to Mark Andreessen, said, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. You get to have AI, you can do AI, but then you can't. No winners or loser. It's luce libre, you guys. You're free to do whatever you want. I'm not going to get the antitrust division down your neck. You can be multi-trillionaires. I don't care, but I do care about one thing. It's called America, pro-America. So you go overseas, any country that wants to screw around with you, excuse the language, I will protect you. I'll call up Macron and said, you touch Facebook and you're going to get in trouble. And that was the difference. So over there, you can't express yourself to the same degree as you can here. And that goes back centuries to the differences between the French and the American Revolution and the Scottish Enlightenment versus the French Enlightenment. Very different. Rousseau and Voltaire from David Hume was a leftist, but Bentley and all those other people, Adam Smith particularly. So we have a big difference but here the left doesn't, they're always attacking our own revolution and the founding fathers. They prefer the French model. They really do. They're always saying that we should get rid of the First Amendment now and get rid of the Second Amendment. And we really, they just don't believe in the founding anymore because it allows people to object. And they feel that with race, in their race fixations and diversity, equity, that's egalitarianism in France, and diversity, equity, inclusion. And if you don't like it, shut up. That's their attitude on the left. And so they want to suppress things. That's why if you go on a Google search today and you search something, for example, I searched today, I was doing the edits for my second volume of the Trump book. And I said, I had a statement that Kash Patel was surveilled by the FBI. And I have an editor, not the editor, but one editor who's very left-wing, said, there's no evidence that took place. So I have to almost footnote I sneeze and I have to footnote it. So I did a Google search, Patel surveilled. Although there were allegations, there was no evidence that Kash Patel, he was surveilled because they accused him of leaking information from the Senate, the House Intelligence Committee, of which he was a chief advisor and legal for Devin Nunes. But my point is, every fact, the AI takes a left-wing view. And then when you search, it's all the order of the search is all the left-wing New York Times, Washington Post, Political, and you won't find any truth to its, Victor Hanson out on Selma, California type stuff.
Yeah.
Democrats used to say, well, we represent the people, the poor people, and they're always trying to suppress voters. They're suppressing voters by having mail-in balloting I don't know what the word is.
Nullify,
bastardize, make it inflate the vote. But if you got everybody who is eligible to vote and only eligible to vote, conservatives would be in fine shape. And they better do it because the left know the more desperate they get that they do not have the votes, the more they're going to be relying on technologies or institutions to warp public opinion and communication. That's what that's what it is, because it's all based on the principle of an equality of result, and people don't believe in that. It's not natural.
Yeah. Another threat to democracy, I think, is lawfare, as even our viewers understand it. That lawfare is the abuse of power to subvert democracy. And we've seen it. And I know that most of the viewers understand the cases against Donald Trump, the only one being I think it was the Letitia Day, or was it Alvin Bragg that got 51 indictments by multiplying the 13 different entries. And that was all about Trump, whether he paid personally or paid through his campaign. He paid personally Stormy Daniels to not talk. And so anybody who looks at that would say, well, if he would have paid with the campaign money, they would have indicted him as well.
It was even worse because the federal government, that was a federal law, campaign financing. He was running in a federal election. And the liberal people on the Fed side said, I'm not going to touch it in New York. It's just a joke. He's a celebrity, and he was alleged to have had this quickie sexual act with this pornographic stripper, and it's embarrassing. Anybody with his power would want to make sure that she just got some money and disappeared. It had nothing to do necessarily with his campaign, because when was it done? 2012 or so? I mean, the incident was 2012. It was, but they said he was I should correct that. Alvin Bragg said, I'm representing the federal government, and even though they don't want to enforce a federal law that doesn't apply here, I will kind of stretch a state law to take place of the federal law that the federal prosecutors think is a joke.
Yes.
That's what he did. And he said, basically, the subtext was, I can do anything I want. I'm in New York.
Yeah.
So 73% of the people voted against Trump.
Yeah. Well, okay. So given that, and given that the other cases fizzled, we know that there was no criminal action whatsoever against Donald Trump, and we can call it lawfare. But now the left is saying that the indictment of James Comey, the referral of John Brennan to the Justice Department, and John Bolton's indictment are all lawfare. And I was wondering your views on that. Who is using lawfare to destroy democracy, the left or the right?
There's a big fight. Number one, there's a big fight on the conservative side. I'll go back to my little devil angel simile. There's a little angel on the right, and he whispers in the conservative mind, don't do that. We're better than that. That's not who we are. If we emulate Letitia James and Fannie Willis and Jack Smith and E. Jean Carroll, if we were to stoop and Alvin Bragg, we'd be no better than they would. And more importantly, tit for tat, tat for tit, every administration would do this and they would wreck So we are better. We're not going to do that. And then there's a little devil on my left. I said, you idiot. Where'd you come from? You live in the real world. We don't live in heaven. They're going to keep doing it. It's called deterrence, dummy. We do it back one time, and then we say, do you want to go do this? Because we're going to do it every time you do. Do you understand that? And if you don't understand it, what do you think the left does? we are short 20 congressional seats based on national voting totals, underrepresented in the House. So Texas just wanted to even the score a little bit. And did you guys on the left say, well, we're not going to reapportion because to do that would be to destroy the nonpartisan reapportionment committee in California, and we're better? No, they did this. They got it passed. Then they did even worse. They got their little friends, the cherry-picked judges, so a left-wing judge threw out the Texas, and nobody's going to sue here in California because we're all left-wing, so we're going to end up with a twofer. We got California 5 more seats, and we punish Texas. They're not going to.
All right, thoughtful analysis there from Victor Davis Hanson. There is a 2-part documentary from PBS on Henry Kissinger, and I found this bit interesting. The talking heads were appalled that Henry Kissinger put American interests ahead of the interest of people in Bangladesh.
Disaster inflicted by a government that we supported.
Oh my God.
So a number of us, especially younger officers, felt that we needed to send in an expression of dissent. Our government has failed to denounce the suppression of democracy. Our government has failed to denounce atrocities. Our government has evidenced what many will consider moral bankruptcy.
So is there any adaptive evolutionary advantage to sacrificing your own tribe's interests for the sake of people on the other side of the world to whom you have no relationship? There isn't. So when there's no obvious evolutionary advantage, in fact, this is an evolutionary disadvantage, that what you're dealing with here is BS, posturing, and a status game.
We've been in touch, of course, with the Pakistanis through messages that are sent to President Yahya, and incidentally, he's been very forthcoming.
Well, we can't be blamed for it. There are many areas in the world that we just can't be responsible for.
I was shocked by the lack of reaction from Kissinger and Nixon. They seemed unaffected by it, except in the sense that.
Pretty shocking that 2 American politicians were unaffected by suffering in Bangladesh, but there's no adaptive evolutionary reason why they would be affected by people completely different from them who had no effect on them. So why would they be affected? It reminds me of all the news media focus on the taking out of drug smuggling ships around Venezuela, right? The way we are built is we are not programmed to give a damn about outgroups. There's absolutely no reason why any ordinary American would care about the destruction of these drug ships and drug dealers. The only reason that you would care, the only evolutionary advantage, is if you're playing a status game and you're trying to show yourself as more moral and of higher status. So let's just call out all the moral hysteria about this for what it is. It is a status game. Now, when you're winning a status game, you never acknowledge it's a status game. Instead, it's like you're pursuing what's true and moral, and you are concerned about upholding international law and upholding norms, right? That's how you speak when you're winning a status game. When you're losing a status game, you say, look, this is a status game. It's silly. So these people pretending to care so much about suffering in Bangladesh, right? They're playing a status game that they think that they're winning at. If they thought they were losing the status game, they would say, hey, this is a status game. It's obviously evolutionary maladaptive for America to sacrifice its interests for Bangladesh.
That they wanted it to go away.
As far as Kissinger was concerned, these lives in South Asia, they just didn't matter. We've never...
Guess what? Nobody cares about lives of people in outgroups on the other side of the world. To pretend to care about that is to play a status game, which is fine, but let me just call it out for what it is. It's a status game.
Covered the bodies of my uncles.
There could have been an arms cut off. There could have been stronger measures taken against Pakistan, which were not taken.
And that would have prevented or made more difficult the American alignment with China at the time, which was in America's strategic interests. So these commentators, these experts are just appalled that American leaders pursued American interests rather than Bangladeshi interests.
Ultimately, it comes down to Kissinger's assessment that what matters is China. And what happens in East Pakistan is almost a footnote.
Well, guess what? What happens in East Pakistan doesn't matter to America. Guess what? What happens in Ukraine does not matter to America. It has no effect on America. Being in bad relations with Russia, that really does affect America. That puts all sorts of American interests and lives and safety at risk.
Relative to these larger objectives.
There are governments in power that may not meet all our criteria for democratic principles, but the alternative to which are likely to be positively hostile to our interests. To manipulate the domestic politics of another country is always an extremely complicated matter.
It's a very dangerous thing, very likely to blow back negatively on America, but it's an opportunity to play a status game. It's an opportunity for you to gain status at the expense of the interests of Americans.
And you can start a process which you cannot control, and you may not know how to do it.
This is great. Believe me, you'll appreciate it.
My first encounter with the great man was when there was a luncheon at our residence. My father was Foreign Affairs Minister. And in this luncheon, there was a big debate. And Kissinger says, look, I don't care about Latin America. I don't care about your development. History doesn't go through the South. History comes from Russia to Japan to...
Right, if all of the global South just disappeared tomorrow, right, the global North would be barely affected. The United States has important strategic interests in Northeast Asia, number one, Europe mildly, and the Middle East mildly, right? Our vital interests are in Northeast Asia. We have no vital interests in Ukraine. We have no vital interests in Latin America. We have no vital interests in the global South.
To Europe and to the United States. The South has no importance.
Boy, they really didn't appreciate that real talk.
Kissinger called Chile a dagger pointed at the heart of Antarctica. He did not think that Latin America was important. He, in fact, said Latin America is not important.
Chile was probably the country that first had a stable democracy in the region. We had a democracy even before some European countries.
Oh my God, if Chile had a democracy before European countries, that is so important for vital American interests. Oh, then so important. We've got to completely change my mind, right? Henry Kissinger was given some real talk, and not everyone appreciated honest talk, right? I hear honesty is a good thing, but a lot of experts say didn't appreciate honesty. Right, here is a conservative, and I think much of her commentary is tendentious and giving conservatives what they want to hear. But here we go. Women can't find jobs and are losing their social status. Some of it's
are
real.
going to be the biggest losers in the new AI economy that's emerging, and they are already starting to crash out. You're seeing this manifest in the dating market. You're seeing this in politics. And if you're on LinkedIn, you're seeing this on LinkedIn as well. And I think this is going to have tremendous implications for the world around us in the future that emerges as a result of the disruption that AI is going to cause. So I want to dive into this post that a woman named Casey posted on LinkedIn. And it's literally, she says it's a cry for help. And I see posts like this all the time in my LinkedIn feed. Part of this is because of the work I did before I started doing videos on YouTube. I was a freelance SEO writer. So I wrote search engine optimized content, mostly personal finance content. And a lot of writing jobs have just been obliterated in the last year or two. Part of that is because of AI, but part of it is also because AI is changing business models. So Google search has fundamentally changed. And with that, how websites generate revenue has also changed. So you've probably experienced this yourself. Instead of clicking through onto a website to learn about a topic you're interested in, you'll just type your query into Google search or even ChatGPT for that matter. And then you'll stop at the AI overview. You'll read the synopsis that the Google AI overview provides you, and that's it. So because people aren't clicking through to websites as much anymore, all of these websites that once hired writers and editors and content strategists to help them produce content for the websites, they're no longer economically viable. So you've seen a ton of people in that space who have been let go in the past couple of years. Like digital media has just taken a tremendous hit. You know, I'm definitely a victim of this as well. Lost 100% of my income because of this. And so you're seeing a lot of people pleading on platforms like LinkedIn, begging for jobs. And the problem is they don't recognize that the jobs they expect or want to have simply no longer exist, or at least don't exist in the price point that they can afford to continue working them. So this is going to be massively disruptive for everyone in the economy, but I think women are going to be hit particularly hard. And I think there's some very good reasons for this. I mean, one, the biggest thing, women don't work as demanding jobs as men. Just compare someone like this who's a communications and content manager with a guy working on an oil rig, a guy doing construction, any sort of like blue collar, heavy, physical labor job. It's apples to oranges, right? And so you have women who are accustomed to working easy, I'd say relatively easy, comfortable office jobs. They're used to like the social status and prestige that those office jobs provide them, and those jobs are rapidly disappearing. And I think one of the faults of women, and part of why feminism is really so destructive, is a lot of these women have been complaining that the patriarchy is underpaying them, that they're not being paid their worth, when in reality the market has been sending these women signals for years that the labor they are providing is not valuable in the economy. I'll give you a couple examples. So if you're not familiar, Morning Brew is a popular newsletter, digital content service. They do business stuff, but they've also expanded in recent years. They do like tech and health and all that kind of stuff. So they have some job postings. And I just wanted to show you kind of what the job landscape is for women right now. So this is for a reporter for CFO Brew, which is one of their newsletter verticals. It's based in New York City, so it's based in a high cost of living area. And if you go down here, compensation, $75,000 to $80,000 a year. So if you live in New York City and you're working this job, not only is like $75,000 really not a good salary for someone in 2025, but when you're living in a city like New York that is heavily taxed, your take-home pay is going to be probably closer to like $50,000, $50,000 a year. So you really don't have a lot to work with. So this job pays $75,000 to $80,000 dollars. It's for a reporter. This one is a social video producer. Again, these are two jobs women typically will apply for. Again, $75,000 to $85,000. And then another one, events manager. Women love working these types of jobs, all in New York. And this one is slightly higher. You'll get $85,000 to $90,000. But again, all three of these jobs pay less than $100,000 a year, definitely less than what you need to survive in New York City. And these are all jobs that are category types that are typically dominated by women. So women are looking at this as the patriarchy oppressing them, and that's how they've framed this for several years now. But in reality, this is the market signaling that there's an overabundance, an oversupply of labor for these positions, and so they don't command as high of a salary as other positions, like working on an oil rig, for example, and as a result, they don't pay as much. So women are self-selecting for relatively easy and comfortable jobs that simply don't pay as much, and they're not looking at signals in the market to understand that their labor simply isn't in demand. So I think as jobs decrease, especially jobs that women are looking for, and there's an increase in available supply of labor in the market, it's just going to continue pushing wages down. So it's going to be a race to the bottom. Other issues though that women are going to face, they're kind of lazy, and I say this as a female. Women just don't work as hard as men. So people are going to have to retrain. They're going to have to become AI literate. They're going to need to learn new skills. Like one of the top in-demand jobs right now with regard to artificial intelligence is a forward deployed engineer. So basically it's someone who can understand and navigate the tech stuff, but also someone who can work with a business enterprise client to help them implement. So it's someone who can help integrate AI into business workflows, which is a high need and high demand need for businesses right now, but who also has technical capacities to like debug and understand what's going on. And so those jobs are paying, you know, not great, I would say, comparatively speaking, but like they're in demand. So there's no shortage of those jobs, right? But so you need to retrain for those jobs. There's an abundance of online courses you can take. You can do a boot camp. There's all sorts of things you can do to retrain, right? Women aren't going to be the ones signing up for these things. And you can see this with regard to how tech played out over the past decade. You know, women have a preference for spending their weekends going to brunch or going to SoulCycle or kind of living a comfortable life. They're not going to be the ones that wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and hustle and grind before their, you know, 9 to 5 job. They're not going to be the ones that volunteer for extra work, especially if it's unpaid work. And they're just not going to be the ones putting forth the effort. So in addition to them working jobs that are waning in demand, they're not taking the initiative to reskill. And so that's going to handicap them. And I would say the final thing that's really hurting women right now is they're kind of a liability for a lot of corporate offices right now. Women tend to be more political, especially younger women. Again, you saw this with the election of Zoran Mamdani in New York. Overwhelmingly, it was young liberal women who put him into office. But you've seen this over the years with DEI and critical race theory and all sorts of implementation of these things in the corporate office setting. This makes women a liability. Like if you're a hiring manager right now and you have the pickings in the labor market and you have a choice between someone who's going to work hard, might put in overtime, especially if it's unpaid, and they'll go above and beyond to do the work that needs to be done, or someone who's going to complain that the patriarchy is not paying them enough, that's going to be lazy, that's going to take excessive coffee breaks, and that is going to push for activist political policies within a corporate office setting. Like, I think the choice is pretty simple right now. So I think women have handicapped in themselves, not all women, of course, and I'm not saying this particular women,
can help you, but the wrong advice can lead you down a path of wasting years. In this video, I'm going to tell you the 5 worst pieces of advice people give out. If you haven't gotten one of these, I'd be shocked. And I'll show you what to do instead so you can build a life you're proud of instead of one filled with regret. I'll be drawing from my research, lessons from my career working in the White House and writing 7 books, even as the dad of 3 kids. Let's go. Dangerous advice number 1. You can be anything you want to be. If this were true, I'd be a retired NBA legend, not the guy who was cut from a 7th grade basketball team and asked to handle the statistics. The truth is, we're just not good at some things. One of my own adulthood's most important discoveries is that I'm not good at most things. There's a tendency among parents and bosses in the wider world to try to fix our weaknesses. And I get that. We should make sure our weaknesses don't hold us back too much. But we will generally be much better off if we accentuate our strengths. For instance, at one point in my life, I thought I should be running something, a big media outlet, an important nonprofit. But I'm not very good at that. I'm a mediocre organizer and orchestrator. You could send me to 5 years of boss training, and I think I'd still be pretty bad. But rather than lose myself in the delusion that I can become anything, I work to understand my unique strengths, and I've tried to use those. So what do? When you're young, try lots of stuff, sure. Experiment, play around with different skills, subjects, and areas. By all means, pursue your dreams. If you're both open-minded and hard-headed, though, you'll learn you can't be anything, but you can become really good at a few things. I'm a fan of the Japanese concept of ikigai. Your success, your happiness, your very reason for being sits at the intersection of 4 areas. What you like doing, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. Look at this chart. It doesn't say you can be anything, not at all, but it does say there's a narrow patch where you can be something meaningful. That's your sweet spot. On to the second piece of bad advice. Make a plan and follow it. On the surface, seems sensible. Deep down, It's flawed. You know, I talk to lots of young people who have an intricately thought out, meticulously designed plan. I'll major in this subject, which will lead to this first job, which will lead to this next job, which, a decade or two later, will inevitably deliver me to the promised land of my ultimate life goal. They're approaching their life as a series of chess moves, carefully moving pieces from one square to another to try to checkmate life. But that's a mistake. Life isn't chess. It's more like bumper cars. And you're not always the one steering. There are two ways you can make decisions about what to do with your life. You can make decisions for instrumental reasons or fundamental reasons. Instrumental reasons are the building blocks of these detailed plans. They're all about where a decision will lead. I'll study a subject even though I'm not all that interested because it will lead to a job. I'll take a job that seems like a terrible fit because it will lead to the next opportunity. Fundamental reasons are the opposite. They are the antithesis of planning. I'll study this topic because it sounds interesting, even though I don't know precisely where it's going to take me. I'll accept this job because I get to do interesting work with cool people, even though I'm not sure exactly where it's going to lead. When I was younger, I believed in instrumental reasons. I revered them. I was a master tactician and expert planner. But before long, sometimes painfully, I made a startling discovery. Instrumental reasons often just don't work very well. The world is way too complicated and changes in ways you never expect.
Layoffs are here, and as we head into 2026, I think things are only going to go from where they are right now to much, much worse. This is a video by Vanessa Wingard. She does fantastic work covering the implications of technology on society and on the economy, and I wanted to dive into this video because I think it really touches on what we're facing, not just in the coming months, but in the years to come.
I got laid off today. After 10 years.
I told you guys I was let go today after 20 years.
Today, I was laid off at Amazon.
And then I went to Amazon and I worked my literal ass off.
I keep getting job offers that are extremely lowered wages due to them knowing people are desperate.
I got laid off in May. It is now the end of October. Look at all these open tabs. The job hunt right now, you guys. If you got a job, just keep it, okay?
Amazon recently.
So I just right off the bat, if you've watched some of my other videos, you probably know where I'm going with this. Almost all of them, all of those clips there were women. And I think women in white collar professions are going to be most affected by technological job disruptions that are happening right now. A lot of the work that women do, it's not necessarily the high value work they think it is. They're not necessarily working, a full 40+ hour work week, and they're just not generating as much value that companies are looking for right now. So a lot of the job cuts that are happening, they're going to affect women, and I think that's going to pick up speed in the coming months.
Announced their largest corporate layoff, cutting 14,000 employees, with executives hoping to eliminate 600,000 workers by 2033. When Amazon, the U.S.'s second largest employer, starts laying off employees, it gives cover to other CEOs. UPS announced 48,000 layoffs. YouTube is offering its employees voluntary exit packages. Chegg announced it was cutting 45% of its workforce. Target cut roughly 1,800 employees. GM cut roughly 1,700 employees. Meta, Rivian, Ford, the list goes on. And this is just for the month of October. It doesn't even cover the layoffs we've been experiencing throughout the year. But there's one layoff I want to highlight. Paramount. If you watched my previous video, I mentioned how David Ellison, son of tech billionaire Larry Ellison, had purchased Paramount, further growing his media empire. Despite this open letter David sent to Paramount employees after taking over the company, claiming, "You are the heart of this company," Paramount cut 1,000 employees, with that number expected to be 2,000 in coming weeks.
If companies like Google and Amazon and Meta are making billions, why are they laying people off?
Oh, that's easy. Greed. These billionaires don't care about us. They only care about showing growth to Wall Street every 3 months.
It's not even just that. I think that's like the lowest hanging fruit. And I think that's what a lot of people are blaming right now. And it makes sense, right? Because you do look at this and yeah, there is an imperative for tech CEOs in particular to provide a maximum return on investment to their shareholders, because if they don't, they're going to pull out their investment and go take it to a CEO who is going to provide the maximum return on investment. So at this point in time, it's not like Facebook and Meta isn't really just competing with like Snapchat, for example. Like social media platforms aren't really competing with one another. Like Mark Zuckerberg is competing with Andy Jassy at Amazon, and Andy Jassy at Amazon.
In 2021 to 2023, employees had tremendous leverage, right? There was just an enormous desire to hire people during those 2 years, and many employees got used to having the whip end. Since late 2023, employers have had more and more power, and employees have to lump it or find themselves not with employment. So the situation has changed, and the power balance between employees and employers has changed with it.
Is competing with Elon Musk over at Tesla. Even though their industries are different, they're servicing different needs, the fact that their companies are providing significant returns for investors has put them in competition with one another for capital. So that's part of it. The other part of it is honestly more philosophical and spiritual in nature. A lot of tech CEOs out in Silicon Valley, they're not even just interested in maximizing the financial returns on their companies. They're playing the long game. They are looking for legacy. I suspect too that sentiment isn't just like a CEO sentiment. I suspect that's part of like the World Economic Forum Great Reset sentiment. A spiritual, philosophical game that they're playing that's more about long-term influence and setting themselves up for long-term memory in the history books.
Remember when property developer Tim Gurner said that unemployment needed to rise 40-50% to put us workers back in our place?
And we need to see that change. We need to see unemployment rise. Unemployment has to jump 40-50% in my view. We need to see pain in the economy. We need to remind people that they work for the employer, not the other way around. There's been a systematic change where employees feel the employer is extremely lucky to have them. It's a dynamic that has to change. We've got to kill that attitude, and that has to come through hurting the economy, which is what the whole global, the world is trying to do. The governments around the world are trying to increase unemployment.
What isn't discussed enough?
I suspect too that sentiment isn't just like a CEO sentiment. I suspect that's part of like the World Economic Forum Great Reset sentiment. All the elites believe this, that we, the peasantry, have become complacent, how we're ungrateful, how we've forgotten our proper place in society. So the goal is to kind of destroy everything to remind us where we actually stand.
Enough is the shadow layoff system. More companies are hiring part-time and contract workers as a means to cut costs. This means for the workers, no retirement plans, no healthcare benefits, and no severance package. The WARN Act doesn't require corporations in every state to report part-time or contract workers as part of their layoffs. This is why the layoff numbers might seem low, but if we account for all employment type, we've actually seen 13.8 million layoffs from January to August of this year.
This is important because I am one of those 13.8 million. So I was starting the beginning of the year, I was doing freelance writing. It was contract basis. I would receive assignments from editors at a couple different publications, and then I would turn in my assignments. I would submit an invoice. They'd pay my invoice, and we would repeat every single month. And I think I got my last assignment in June, and I got my last check in July, and that check was, 25% of what it was at the beginning of the year, and 10% of what I was making, last year. So this is pretty significant. This has fallen under the radar, and I don't think people have been paying attention to this. And I think she's right. Government data really obfuscates what's actually happening. We look at the official numbers, and it's not actually telling the full story. We've progressively seen a growing gigification of white-collar work over the past few years. And part of that is because of COVID, right? COVID radically changed the nature of work, and it gave employees more free agency than they've had in the past to kind of dictate the terms of their employment. So if you wanted flexible work, if you wanted more remote opportunities, you could go out and get those opportunities. Whereas now things have obviously changed and that's becoming harder to come by. But for a lot of people, you know, when they lost work during COVID and they found themselves unemployed suddenly, many turned to freelance jobs, many turned to, contract work, kind of like temporary arrangements. And the economy hasn't really recovered from that. And I think employers are looking at this as another cost saving mechanism. And I mean, frankly, it makes sense, right? Like a lot of workers, a lot of full-time benefited workers aren't actually putting in a full 40-hour work week. A lot of Microsoft did its own internal analysis of this, but like it's like 16 hours a week their users spend checking email and chatting on Teams, right? So, and I know for my own time working, like this is absolutely true. Like I spent so much time going up for coffee breaks, getting cookies before meetings, attending pre-meetings for meetings. It just a lot of stupid stuff. But it seemed like there was far more downtime and I was bored far more often than I was busy and actually doing work. And I think this is the case for a lot of white collar workers, that there's just not enough work to go around. And I think as part of the
I notice different groups have different commitment to work. Some groups tend to chit-chat a lot more than other groups. And this is just my life experience. Don't yell at me, right? I notice that people from East Asia tend to be the most dedicated, most diligent, and the hardest working of any group. That's just what I see.
This process and the cover, frankly, that AI has given employers, like they may not actually be onboarding AI just yet, but it provides them cover to do some organizational changes. And I think part of that is consolidating jobs together. So instead of, say, having a team of 10 marketing managers in your marketing department, maybe you'll cut it down to 5, right? And so you'll consolidate and rescope the work. And part of that, I think, is going to entail outsourcing work to non-benefited employees. So using freelance labor, using contract workers in order to supplement and augment your workforce. And so, yeah, there's a cost savings there, right? You save on the benefits, but then you're only paying for the hours that that person is working. You're not paying them 40 hours a week to sit and do nothing for 20 hours. So I think that's part of it too. And we're going to see a continuation of this moving forward, where far more work opportunities that are available in the coming months and in the coming years will be freelance and contract work. It won't be W-2 benefited full-time work. And that's not inherently a bad thing.
Okay,